Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. President Trump prepares to announce his US tariffs on his so-called Liberation Day. It comes as Elon Musk will step back from his current government role as Tesla's sales tumble. All countries could face a 20% tax on US imports as the US president claims Americans have been treated unfairly. And trade partners, including the UK and China, wait to discover how the decision will affect their individual economies and lead to potential job losses. To our top story, and President Trump's so-called Liberation Day is here at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, live from the White House Rose Garden. The US president could announce a 20% tax on all countries currently trading with the United States. US investors have warned there could be a risk to sales, margins and profits as import duties rise. Global markets have already been feeling the impact, with the tech-heavy Nasdaq falling more than 1.3% earlier today. That includes stocks of Tesla, which also tumbled today before bouncing back after the White House confirmed Elon Musk will step back from public service when his work at Doge is complete. I'm now joined by Steve Hanke, Professor of Applied Economics at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Steve, a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining me. So the White House have now confirmed Elon Musk is stepping back from his government role, first reported by Politico. So Tesla was down almost 6% earlier following first quarter sales today. But then we did see the stock reverse its loss off the back of this announcement. Are you surprised that Elon Musk is exiting the government?
No, not at all. I knew that this marriage that Trump and Musk had would not continue in its original form. Musk just takes up too much of the media space, and the president wants to monopolize it. So that's one of the main issues. Now, going forward, maybe Musk won't be a front man and quite out there over his skis in the media, but he'll certainly be a right-hand man of Trump. He's not going away. He's just going to disappear from the center of the stage. That's all that's going to happen.
So, Steve, basically, Trump's going to have more of the spotlight on him. But let's turn our attention to tariffs. It's a sea of red across the markets as just as spread on Wall Street. Why are we witnessing so much global uncertainty ahead of Trump's tariffs announcement? We do know that for a long time, Trump has discussed tariffs, even in his campaigning.
Well, he's discussed them in the past, and he's a believer in tariffs. He's a mercantilist. He's not a free trader. So we know all of that. But what's going to happen today at 4 p.m. Eastern Time is that we'll have some certainty, or at least temporary certainty, about exactly what's going to happen. Before, in the past few weeks, he bobs and weaves. One day he says one thing, the next day he says another thing. So we're going to have some temporary certainty on what's happening that will be delivered for this afternoon. Now, the problem with regard to the markets, remember that tariffs are bad news because they're taxes on international transactions. And any time you put a tax on, you put a tax wedge on economic activity. So that means that the net that's left over after a wedge goes in is less than it was before. That means profits are going to be lower than they would before. And in the United States, this has always been a big deal. If you look back in the 1930s, the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which was something like we'll probably get from Trump, caused the stock market to crash. In anticipation of that, the stock market, the Dow Jones peaked out in September of 1929. And by the time July 1932 rolled around, what had happened? The market had lost 89% of its value. It had completely collapsed, and the reason for that was the tariff. That was a big part of the thing. The other part of it, by the way, was the fact that the money supply was contracting in the United States during the Great Depression. It's only contracted 4 other times historically since 1913, and now it's contracting. Since the summer of 2022, the money supply is actually contracted. The stock of money in the United States is less now than it was in the summer of 2022. As a result, we'll have a slowdown coming. And then added to that, we get the tariff tax, which will drive it down even further. So I anticipate, the consensus thinks that the profit growth in the United States for shares that are traded in New York is about 15%. I think it'll end up about 5%. So we're going to see a big adjustment coming in the market, I think.
So Christine Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank, has said tariffs will have a negative worldwide impact. You just spoke to me right now about the impact we could see in the US markets, but do you agree with her assessment on a global stage?
Yes, I do. Taxes always slow everything down. So if you tax international trade, you're going to get less of it. And if you get less of it, it's bad news for profits. And if you have bad news for profits, you get an adjustment downward in the stock market. And in addition to that, you'll have continued, this won't be certain. Whatever is announced at 4 p.m. today, Eastern time, won't be certain because Trump will change his mind. So you'll have a lot of regime uncertainty associated with this. And when you have regime uncertainty associated with the flow of income that's coming in, what happens, people discount that flow of income at higher interest rates, and that makes the present value of the flow go down. So that means the stock prices will go down.
Steve, you know, obviously, when Donald Trump was campaigning, a lot of it was on the economy to make people have money in their pockets again in America. He also wants to increase manufacturing, bring America back to the golden age. You know, he's touted this as something that America really needs to do to bring down its trade deficit with the rest of the world. Do you think he can achieve what he's looking to do by bringing in these tariffs? Is there any silver lining to the announcement we could get today?
Oh, no, not at all. This isn't Liberation Day. This is Doom Loop Day. Tariffs are a complete loser's game. Trump thinks that trade deficits are made by nefarious actions by foreigners, and he thinks that trade deficits are bad. Actually, trade deficits are created and made in the USA, because the savings in the USA they're less than the investments in the USA. And naturally, we know from economic theory and principles that the gap, that deficiency is filled in with a trade deficit. And it's easy to finance in the United States. We have tremendously thick capital markets. We have the US dollar, the international reserve currency. Everyone wants to be invested in the United States and in dollars. So we've had a deficit since 1975 in the United States. It's easy to finance. It's made in the USA, and it's good for Americans. A trade deficit's good, not bad. So the whole premise of the Trump tariff madness is wrong. Deficits are good. They're made in the USA. They're good. They're good for Americans. Americans consume much more than they produce, and they're easy to finance. So what's the problem? he's got the whole thing upside down.
Steve Hanke, Professor of Applied Economics at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Thank you so much for your insights this evening.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Ukrainian military officials say Russian drone strikes in eastern Ukraine have killed at least one person and injured 10. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry said it intercepted and destroyed 93 Ukrainian drones over the Kursk region on Tuesday night. It comes as a senior Russian negotiator, Kirill Dmitriev, the chief of Russia's Sovereign Wealth Fund, is expected in Washington to meet with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Yemen's Houthis say an attack which they are blaming on the United States has killed 4 people. Houthi media reports have claimed U.S. airstrikes on areas controlled by the Iran-backed group took place in multiple regions, including the group's northern stronghold of Sadr. The United States has not confirmed it carried out these strikes. A Democratic U.S. senator has broken the record for the longest speech in Senate history. Cory Booker stood up for more than 25 hours to deliver an anti-Trump speech in protest against President Donald Trump's unconstitutional actions. And Hollywood actor Val Kilmer has died from pneumonia at the age of 65. The star fronted some of the biggest movies of the 80s and 90s, including Top Gun and Batman Forever, and also my favorite, True Romance. Now, returning to those looming U.S. tariffs, which President Trump believes may affect all countries. Although the Trump administration expects trillions of U.S. dollars in new revenues, there's worries that the impact will send shockwaves through the stock market and global economy. Trump's motto of America First has the potential to damage its relationships with the rest of the world. However, here's what he told reporters just earlier this week.
We have Liberation Day, as you know, on April 2nd. Because, and I'm not referring to Canada, but many countries have taken advantage of us, the likes of which nobody even thought was possible for many, many decades, for decades. And, you know, that has to stop. We're going to end up with a very good relationship with Canada and a lot of the other countries. Some we probably won't. It won't be so pleasant. But I think most countries are agreeing with me. They actually, many of them have actually apologized. They said, look, we have taken advantage. And
we can now speak to Angie Wong, Miami Executive District Committee woman. Angie, great to have you on the show. Before we get to tariffs, Elon Musk is stepping back in the coming weeks from his current role as governing partner. Is this news a shock? And could this be related to slumping Tesla sales?
Well, absolutely. I'm sure the shareholders and stockholders of Tesla is asking him to step back a little bit as Americans and protesters here are lighting Teslas on fire in protest of Elon Musk's involvement in the Trump administration. So I have no doubt that is related. Elon Musk, make no doubt, is still working very hard behind the scenes. He's formed an amazing team to do the work. And I think that although his figurehead may not be there every single day on the news, certainly work is still being done at Doge.
Donald Trump has us all on tender hooks, Angie, as he prepares to announce the administration's tariff plans. The U.S. markets are lower in anticipation. What can we expect from the president when he makes that announcement in the Rose Garden later?
Well, certainly it's developing minute by minute. Already we're seeing some clarifications on what these tariffs actually mean. Before, it was very broad stroked. Every country is getting tariffed by the U.S., getting reciprocal tariffs. And certainly phone calls are being made to the White House over the last few days, trying to basically work a deal out with the art of the deal president. So we already have Israel, Mexico, and Canada who have all said that they are going to be canceling their U.S. tariffs in trade for working with the United States. And we're hoping for more of that. Just in the last hour, Trump has tailored his tariff talks to individualize them by country and industries, because he understands that the auto industry and the energy sectors, well, we still need that as Americans. We cannot push that one too hard. So I think you're going to see that at the 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time announcement. And we're going to probably see a lot more definition so that this is not so broad stroked. And certainly countries are on standby because they're all trying to do some last minute dealing with President Trump.
Yes, indeed. And we have seen some other countries come out and say they're going to put reciprocal tariffs on. They don't know exactly what that is yet, but they're waiting to respond. Trump's tariffs are set to hit allies and enemies who, in the words of the White House, are ripping America off. But the U.S. economy relies heavily on imports. Are you and the rest of Americans prepared to pay more for everything that you purchase?
Well, absolutely. And anyone who's been following Trump during the campaign trail, he's been taunting this for the last 4 years. And I do agree with some of the points. I think it's time we stop talking about free trade and start talking about fair trade. And that's all he really wants from all this. Up until yesterday, Canada was taxing Americans 270% on dairy products and eggs. We don't think that's very fair. So I think we have a president now who wants to renegotiate all of that so that it is more fair to Americans, because ultimately, yes, we are prepared. Americans are prepared for short-term pain. But in the long term, what do we get out of this? We get protection of American jobs and more manufacturing jobs to bring back to our homeland. We have, we have national security, and this is also going to strengthen the U.S. dollar in the long term. So will Americans take the short-term pain? Yes, we'll do so, but how much? I think that's the ultimate question. Midterms for us are around the corner. We've already kicked off the midterm election season. We need this to be a quick result, and hopefully President Trump is going to feel that pressure and not hold us to the fire for too long.
Angie, I actually wanted to just come to the midterms because Trump obviously campaigned on the economy and making America great again. If we see the tariffs becoming inflationary and the cost of living in America going up, do you think this could hit Trump during the midterms?
Well, 100%. And this is going to be every American's issue come the midterms. How much are we paying for eggs? How much are we paying for gas? How much are we paying for automobiles, right? And I think that is going to be the determining factor for Americans to get out to vote during the midterms. So he can play this game, this art of the deal game, and he could swing these tariffs as far right as he possibly can right now. But for how long can he do that for before we really start suffering? And I think world leaders understand that, and that's their leverage right now with the White House. Again, we're prepared to do this for a while, but certainly not for years. So I think Trump has to be very, very careful when he throws out big words like we're just going to tax everyone with tariffs. Ultimately, the plan is to get rid of personal income tax here in the U.S. That's the agenda. That's the goal, and replace them with worldwide tariffs. Again, I believe in the Trump administration. I think Peter Navarro behind all of this is doing a great job. He certainly has worked out some of the numbers. Will Americans have the appetite long term? Not sure.
Miami Executive District Committee woman Angie Wong, great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you again.
Let's take another look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Israel says it will expand military operations in Gaza and take over a large territory to make them into security zones. Defense Minister Israel Katz says the operation aims to, he says, destroy and clear the area of terrorists and terrorist infrastructure. The move is expected to displace scores of Palestinians. The Republicans have won a special congressional election in Florida to fill the seat of National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Their success comes with a reduced majority and against Democrat Josh Weil. In other Florida special elections, Republican Jimmy Patrons is won over Democrat Gay Baltimore to replace former Representative Matt Gaetz. Myanmar's junta chief is riding a wave of diplomatic progress as his country reels from the effects of a devastating quake. The ruling general's position has strengthened with the opening of diplomatic channels that remain dormant following the 4-year-long civil war. Conversations with the heads of India, Malaysia and China have led to planeloads of aid. And tech mogul Elon Musk has once again claimed the top spot on the annual Forbes list of billionaires. Musk's net worth grew by 75% to an estimated $342 billion. Meta founder Mark Zuckerberg takes the second spot, followed by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. President Donald Trump comes in at number 700 with a net worth of $5.1 billion. Along with the rest of the world, the United Kingdom awaits news of how the tariffs will affect them. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and President Trump spoke on the phone earlier this week, discussing the so-called productive negotiations towards a UK-US economic prosperity deal. But it's the UK car trade which could feel the impact most, with more than 25,000 jobs at risk if auto exports fall in the US. Earlier today, Starmer addressed Parliament in regard to the UK-US relations.
Thanks. Mr. Speaker, we've been preparing for all eventualities ahead of the confirmation of US tariffs later today. Let me be clear with the House. A trade war is in nobody's interests. And the country deserves, and we will take, a calm, pragmatic approach. That's why constructive talks are progressing to agree a wider economic prosperity deal with the US. That's why we're working with all industries and sectors likely to be impacted.
We can now go live to London to speak to Sir Jeremy Greenstock, Chairman of Gatehouse Advisory Partners and former UK Ambassador to the United Nations. Jeremy, I can't get it. I'm so sorry. I do apologise. Apologies. Let's start with Starmer. So Starmer also said constructive talks with America are progressing to agree a wider economic prosperity deal with the US. But it seems the UK are as much in the dark about the incoming tariffs as the rest of the world.
Yes, the Americans have not been transparent about what they're intending to do. They clearly haven't given the UK any kind of an exit route for this. They're going to hit all countries everywhere, it seems. But it's important that we already have a series of talks ongoing with the Americans on a bilateral trade deal now that we're out of the European Union. And that is an important possible exit route for Sir Keir Starmer in dealing with this tariff threat. But they're going to be on in the first instance. It's going to harm UK exports to the US. We don't know how long they're going to last. And we don't know to what extent President Trump is going to be committed to tariffs for the whole period of his tenure in the White House. So there are plenty of uncertainties that have got to be worked through. And I think the Americans themselves, as you've been discussing earlier in your program, will have to decide whether they are good for the US and for the US consumer, or they're going to produce inflation and a loss of jobs and all sorts of other disadvantages. So there are a lot of uncertainties here.
Yes, and that's exactly what Angie was saying to me earlier. How long will the American public put up with things if the cost of living does rise? But the British government's trade deficit with the US is lower than a majority of European countries. What is the UK hoping for when these tariffs are announced? And will the so-called special relationship actually carry any weight in this game?
The special relationship is a nice piece of rhetoric. It doesn't mean very much in the real hard life of business. And if any American president is going to be dealing with the hard end of business, it's going to be President Trump. So there's no sentiment here. There's no favors being offered. The British have got to earn their relationship with the United States. And that is what the Prime Minister is going to have to look at. I don't think the figures show that we are treating the United States, if you take the whole range of British trade and investment with the US, at all unfairly. So we are at the margins of what the United States might be able to retrieve by way of unfair practice abroad. But clearly, the president is aiming at everybody in order to create maximum leverage for the deals that will follow. The time taken for all of this, I think, is going to be damaging, whether it's for the UK, for Europe, for the Middle East, for everybody. We do not need more trade wars, more cross tariffs in a global economy which is already suffering from the antagonism to globalization that has come in over the last few years. So this is a very controversial use of instrument by the Americans. And I think, as some of your previous interlocutors have been saying, it could easily blow back on the Americans themselves. But it's certainly not going to aid or help UK-US trade in the short term.
So today, the Institute for Public Policy Research released a survey which warns that Trump's car tariffs could put 25,000 UK jobs at risk. Do you agree with this assessment? And as you were just talking to me, we are already in uncertainty, and this could add to this. How worrying is this for the UK government's growth plans and also just on a geopolitical scale?
Well, I haven't made my own estimate, obviously, of the number of job cuts that may come in the car industry. I think that's the worst case scenario. No company is going to make immediate decisions. They'll see how things pan out over the following weeks. We are in the whole process of bilateral trade talks with the US. So while that is a lovely figure to put in the headlines of journalistic comments, it's only a worst case scenario. But you're right, it comes at a time when the UK is struggling to produce economic growth. The British Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Treasury, are looking for ways to increase UK growth, and this is not a measure that will aid that whole process. So there are all sorts of other things going on at the same time to mend the British economy. This has come at an embarrassing time for the government in that effort to rebuild our economy.
So, Jeremy, just very briefly, what does this mean for US soft power around the world?
I think the Americans are taking a risk. Already, Europe has lowered its trust in the US. You can see that in the public comments. And trust is an important part of soft power. So this search for leverage, this almost bullying approach from the Americans is not going to increase their influence around the world. I think this will play out in other areas where soft power is important. So it's a great risk that President Trump is taking.
So Jeremy Greenstock, chairman of Gatehouse Advisory Partners and former UK ambassador to the UN. I'm glad I got your name right in the end. Thank you so much for joining me. Much appreciated. China has long been in the firing line of President Trump's tariffs. During his election period, he threatened a 60% flat duty on all Chinese imports coming into the US. Now, a reduction could be made in exchange for the sale of Chinese-owned platform TikTok. The Trump administration have now confirmed Amazon has put a bid in to buy the social media site. Leigh has more on how Beijing has been reacting to and preparing for the latest chapter in the US-China trade war.
China is no stranger to US tariffs. The difficulty this time round, though, is the scale and the scope. Since his return to the White House, US President Donald Trump hasn't just been targeting specific industries. He announced a blanket duty on all Chinese imports. And a month later, he doubled it. His desires to slap tariffs on other countries might seem like on the surface for China, well, at least they're not the only ones this time round. But in reality, Trump's tariff diplomacy threatens the stability of the global economy, which inevitably has consequences on China too. But we know also that in recent weeks, Washington has been dangling a potential TikTok for tariff relief deal to China. As always with Trump, it seems like everything can be a deal. He has torn up traditional diplomatic protocol. Beijing isn't going to go that far when it comes to diplomacy, but it has been thinking outside the box too to deal with the situation. China announced that it would like to coordinate a response with Japan and South Korea on the issue of US tariffs. The three countries who notoriously struggle to get along have revived trade dialogue for the first time in 5 years. Seoul and Tokyo say no concrete decision has yet been made, but it is interesting to note that everyone, the US's friends and foes, are having to come up with some kind of contingency plan. China has also recently hosted a top international business meeting, trying to woo leaders to invest more in their country. A red carpet welcome for Tim Cook of Apple, the executives of Pfizer, FedEx, Visa, etc. They even got a sit down with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Since Trump's election, Beijing has certainly shown that it is willing to negotiate, and it is also willing to strike back with retaliatory tariffs in its arsenal, as well as export controls on critical minerals, all the while trying to defend its own interests and its own priorities.
Leigh in Beijing, thank you. A reminder of our top stories. President Trump prepares to announce his US tariffs on his so-called Liberation Day. It comes as Elon Musk will step back from his current government role as Tesla's sales tumble. All countries could face a 20% tax on US imports as the US president claims Americans have been treated unfairly. And trade partners, including the UK and China, wait to discover how the decision will affect their individual economies and lead to potential job losses. And that's all from us on W News. Thanks so much for joining us. And from tomorrow, W News will be broadcast an hour earlier. Plus, we'll be bringing you W News Extra a little later on as we provide you with 6 hours of content right here on Al Arabiya News. And of course, more of me. But looking ahead tonight, Hadley Gamble's interview with the economic historian Dan Jurgen is coming up next, followed by The Dressing Room. And of course, don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Lots to watch. Good night.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Dan Jurgen, thank you so much for joining Al Arabiya.
Glad to be back with you, Hadley.
I want to ask you to walk me through where we are today in the energy transition.
I think the energy transition is in need of a major rethink, because I think a lot of the expectations, a lot of the planning, a lot of the spending was done really crystallized during COVID when demand was down and prices were down. And the consequence of that is that you had these straight lines, linear lines that went to 2050 net zero, when almost half the world's emissions were not even covered by them. And I think there's been a lot of experience and a lot of lessons that are really driving a kind of new realism and pragmatism about the energy transition, not in the way that in a dominant fashion it's been talked about, particularly in Northwest Europe and in North America.
Essentially, the politicians are going to have to get real.
I think the politicians, and I think people who think about energy transition in what has been reduced to very simple ways without realizing just how complex it is to change a $15+ trillion world economy in 25 years, when all the other energy transitions took a century or longer and were not really just energy transitions, they were also energy additions, because nothing else ever went away. And that's where we are today.
So when we talk about renewables, when we talk about solar and wind, adding capacity, essentially that didn't mean that fossil fuels were reduced.
No, Hadley, here's the way to just make it very simple. 2024, wind and solar were at the highest levels they ever were. In 2024, oil and coal were at the highest levels they were ever, and natural gas would have been there except for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which disrupted global gas markets.
So essentially what we're seeing is a world still very hungry for energy.
Yes, of all forms of energy. So wind and solar, of course, now well-established businesses. But if you still look at it, in the latest data we had in 2022, 81% of the world's energy was hydrocarbons. In 2023, it was 80.5%, a 0.5% change.
Okay, so those who are passionate about the green agenda would say, what are we doing wrong? How can we fix this?
Well, I think the number thing to step back and say, how challenging is it? What are you trying to do? And there are any number of challenges that we can do. I think the first step is really to be realistic about what's actually trying to do and what the constraints are.
And when we talk about constraints, part of this obviously is funding. How do you finance a transition when everything's getting more expensive?
Well, I think, so I think the first problem is scale, which is trying to change, as I said, this immense world economy in a very short period of time. And I look back, everybody was talking about energy transition, so I looked at, when I was writing the new map about other energy transitions, and you saw how long they took, and as I said, this energy addition. So it's just the scale of doing it in itself, because what you're trying to do is change the entire infrastructure, and then you get to the cost. And the numbers that were used for the Baku UN conference were numbers that would say about 5% of world GDP over a number of years has to be spent on that. Now, developing countries don't have 5% of their GDP. So that means 10% goes to developed countries. Well, let's look at England. Right now, the budget is struggling. That's one country to get it down. Europe now is going to be spending more money on defense and has to restore competitiveness. We'll have less money. And here in Washington,
they don't want to do it.
Well, they don't want to do it. And not only that, whether you're Democrats or Republicans, there's this problem of this $36.5 trillion debt where the interest payments are greater than defense spending. So, just the money's not there to do on scale. So that's just one of the, we should talk, there are a number of other of them that really have to be looked at as well.
Tell me this, how has energy dominance changed the game for this conversation?
Well, I think obviously we've had, like we saw it at our CERAWeek conference this year, like 180% change. Under the Biden administration, it was all of government for climate. Now it's energy dominance, the National Energy Dominance Council. And it's a recognition that the U.S. has this formidable position in the world as by far the world's largest producer of oil and natural gas. It has become, people don't realize it, the scale exports of LNG have become a major export industry. It's twice the value of all of the
Hollywood and television exports to the United States is LNG. But I do want to come back to the other obstacles to the energy transition, because I think if people understand them, they'll see that we really do need this rethink. The return of energy security, that was, people went to sleep about energy security until Ukraine. And then you had the Chancellor of Germany flying to Senegal and flying to Canada or going to Kazakhstan to get oil and gas even while doing that. But I think the biggest issue, and I know in the Gulf region, it's something that people are very aware of, is the split between the North and the South, developing nations who have other priorities. They need economic growth, they need improve health, they need to reduce poverty. So that's there. And then there are a couple of others that have emerged. You know, no one really was talking about critical minerals.
Even just a few years ago.
Yeah, just a few years ago. It really only sort of started to come on the agenda 21, 22. And then you saw, if you're really going to make this transition, you're going to need a lot more materials. An electric car uses 3 times as much copper as a conventional car. And then you see, we did this study at S&P Global. It takes 20 years to bring a new mine on. 20 years. So, well, wait a second. You need to double copper by 2035, but it's going to take another 10 years to bring it on. And then, of course, we get into geopolitics. China, the United States. China dominates exports of solar panels, but it most importantly dominates processing of minerals. And just now here in Washington, there's a big focus on the mineral issue, the critical mineral. We're going to see that energy dominance is going to be an envelope that also includes minerals. So all of that's out there too. And then the last thing that, boy, we saw this at the CERAWeek conference, which is electricity for AI. And in the United States, that means more natural gas going into it. So those are the kind of the parameters. Oh, and tariffs, trade turbulence, all those things. So the notion that you're just going to draw a line and get to net zero by 2035, that's why we say the energy transition is going to be multidimensional. It's going to unfold at different paces, in different regions, with different mixes of technology, and of critical importance, different priorities by different governments.
And in your mind, how prepared is the world for this reality?
I think the developing world is. We've done our Energy Asia conference, and we've certainly heard it there. We've heard it in Africa. We've heard it where, you know, an African country has 1/20th the GDP of a European country being told by European institutions we won't finance a gas pipeline. I think obviously a change is going in Washington, you know, a kind of monumental change. I think Europe is still is struggling with this, and you see it. I think you're going to see it a lot in the battles over the budget, and you're also going to see it in the rise of the populist parties.
No doubt. You mentioned CERAWeek. Obviously, this is your conference. It is the largest gathering, I imagine, of oil and gas CEOs globally.
Yes,
energy companies.
Yes, yeah, it was 10,000 people this year.
10,000 people. You're the Davos of the energy world.
Yes, I think we could say that.
It's true. What was the feeling on the ground? I mean, Donald Trump has been elected. The idea of energy dominance, you know, it's all going to be fossil fuels here on out, but that isn't the case.
Well, I think it was, first of all, LNG was really front and center. That was very interesting to see the sense that the expectations for LNG are continuing to grow. And you heard, like, the Japanese now, for the first time in their energy strategy, are actually seeing more LNG. And a lot of that's related to AI. So that was the first thing. I think the second thing was the big tech companies were there. They've always come before, but they came because they provide services to the energy industry. Now there was customers saying, how do we get our electricity? Certainly we were hearing about what energy dominance means, how it's going to be implemented, and the perspective of the new administration, not so new now. And that was, I mean, in fact, somebody from the Middle East said to me before CERAWeek, we want it to be more US-centric because we want to understand what's going on in a more granular sense. I think in terms of, we have a big technology part of it called the Agora. And there, I think the takeaway was that in terms of renewable new technologies, you're going to have to depend much more on the market, not on government policy and not on incentives and from governments. And so how to be competitive. And I think we saw kind of renewables also shifting from climate to energy security as kind of their rationale.
How unhappy were oil producers at CERAWeek?
Unhappy? No, I wouldn't say unhappy. They were glad to see an administration that was coming in that is going to. The Biden administration had put on. Somebody did a calculation. In general, the Biden administration put on far more regulations across the economy than Obama and others. And to see that unwound was something. They were glad to see the pause on LNG coming to an end and the support for the energy industries. They really want permitting reform because you're not going to be able to provide the electricity if you don't have permitting reform. I think like everybody else, they're wanting to see how the world economy is going to be changed by the tariff policy, the changes in relations. Obviously, we had a lot of Canadians there who were very, thought we had a really tight relationship with the U.S. What is our new relationship now?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of, I think, wanting to understand, and the sense that geopolitics matters in a different way for the energy industries now, including the growing tension between the United States and China.
No doubt. Talk to me about the fragility of the oil market specifically.
Well, I think right now oil markets have actually not been particularly fragile because you have all that overhang of capacity, primarily in the Gulf. I think it's been changed. I think the development of shale has added stability to the market as well as bringing significant new supplies on. But we also know that this market goes in cycles. And one of the key questions is, future investment. And something else I carried away is the sense that a lot of the producers were having the sense that shale is maturing. It's still going to grow, but it's not going to grow a million barrels a day. It's such a pace. And people were starting to say, we're going to have to do more exploration. We started hearing independent companies that have been overseas, out of the U.S. for 2 decades now, starting to go to different parts of the world. So I think there's a sense that not now, but you have to look 5 years down the road as to where the markets will be. And the other question, of course, is a question about demand, and in particular, what's happening in China.
Talk to me about the price, because oil in the low 70s doesn't do anyone any favors.
Well,
unless you're Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, I think the industry in the U.S. feels that they will do okay in the low 70s. They'll continue to invest, but they're worried about prices in the 60s, or somebody from the administration, not a total insider, I think, talked about $50, and that will affect how people invest. So right now, I think there's a sense, we've kind of built our plans around lower prices. What a change, Hadley, from when people not so long ago were thinking $90, $100 a barrel. But I think I've just done a new epilogue for the prize. And instead of just trying to tell what happened, that's my book on the history of oil.
Your Pulitzer Prize-winning book.
My Pulitzer Prize-winning book, yes. What I've done is said, what are the lessons of this book that I worked on for so long and so many people have read? And I think one of the big lessons for me is, while there are hundreds of characters in that book, there are only 2 characters who really, 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 really matter. One is named supply and one is named demand. And so right now we have an oil market that has a lot of extra supply. But if we see, Iran squeezed out of the market, when the Trump administration talks about maximum pressure, that starts to change the balance. Of course, there are always geopolitical events that can affect markets. But I think right now, the outlook we have is for, low 70s Brent price for now, but we don't know how the world is going to be changed by this new switch from global trade to tariffs. On the way over, I was reading a paper by somebody who's in the Trump administration saying how good it will be for the economy. There are other economists who will say this is not going to be good at all. And, we will find out from experience. And one of the things I've learned from writing history, there's a very important law, which is called the law of unintended consequences.
Yes. Tell me this, how much trouble is Saudi Arabia in?
Oh, I don't.
With oil at 74.
I don't think Saudi Arabia is in trouble. I think Saudi Arabia is, will obviously adjust to lower prices, but it's in a formidable position. It is still the single most important oil producer in the world. And I think the economy, adjustments will be made, but that's what you have to.
When you take a step back and look at this sort of within the historical context, you mentioned the prize. Is it difficult to foresee, as you say, unintended consequences, but is it difficult to see how this energy transition is going to be managed? Because we've been talking about this now for several years. The Gulf countries, all of them on board for the energy transition, moving as rapidly as possible. They've got the money to do it, they've got the technology, and they have the will. But when you take a step back and think about this, you've just said this is going to take a lot more money, a lot more time, and it's going to be much more complicated.
Right.
How messy?
Well, I think in a way, I think it's probably useful to think that's a very good question to think about in terms of energy addition. I mean, obviously people will continue to put emphasis on how they manage their emissions, but I think it also means that oil and gas are going to be around for a long time. In fact, I just saw a quote from the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, in which he said, let me level with you, oil and gas is going to be part of the mix for a long time.
And that's actually going out on a limb that other European politicians haven't managed to achieve.
Yeah, that just jumped out at me. And that shows me is that coming...
This is a man, by the way, who before he became Prime Minister told me at the World Economic Forum, no new drilling in the North Sea. He was very much as part of the green agenda, and that was just a couple of years ago.
Now he's come around in favor of it, at least to a degree, and I think they recognize that's the energy security issue.
Yes.
They're going to have a big problem with their electric supply unless they have adequate natural gas to back up this intermittent renewable energy system.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people haven't thought about. And so I don't know if messy is the right word, but complex. So the world will continue, natural gas demand will probably increase into the 2040s, but it will be addition because there'll be a lot more solar. There'll be wind, although offshore wind has run into problems about supply chains and costs and so forth. And there'll be new technologies. China is moving ahead very rapidly with electric cars. The United States is not moving ahead rapidly. Europe is in the middle. The question is, does the German automobile industry recover or survive? Do
you think there's a chance it could be over?
Well, I think that it's so important to the German economy, and with a new government, I think that will, just as we've seen the priority of Keith Starmer's statement, the Germans will, and we've seen the European Union at least talking about being competitive. And as you know, Hadley, when you talk to CEOs, they'll tell you why we're not competitive in Europe is because there is such a weight of regulation. That is the micromanagement that just forces investment in certain directions or sets targets that can't be achieved.
Yes.
And so so verbally they're saying, oh, we're now in favor of competitiveness, and that was what the Draghi report did. But, they have to get out of their way. They have to get away from the old way of doing things and the old way of thinking. The world has changed.
So are we in the midst of what could potentially be called the great recalibration on energy?
I think that's a very good term for it. It is recalibrating and reassessing and recognizing that those simple graphs that go to 2050 is not the way the world's going to go. Yes, people are moving ahead with hydrogen, but not in the way that was assumed. There's still the question, where is a real market for hydrogen? What are the costs? What are the infrastructure?
Yeah.
And by the way, if you're in Europe, yes, you want hydrogen, but you also now are going to have to spend a lot more in defense, and you want a competitive economy. And so, that word trade-offs really looms very large.
It's a tall order.
Yes.
Tell me this, when we talk about Russian energy, just from that perspective alone, how do you view the Russian economy today?
Well, I think at the beginning of, before and just when the war began, it was thought that these sanctions would be a really penalize the economy. And it did for a while, but I think they pivoted to a wartime economy. And I think
you didn't think those energy sanctions were going to do that much.
Well, I think,
and I didn't think that.
Yeah. At the time, I thought, well, these are stronger sanctions, and I also thought, are they putting the right sanctions on? But what's also turned out, I think, as a result of this, is Russia's basically become an economic dependency of China.
Yes, yes. And that's something I've asked them about on multiple occasions. It's not
they
something...
probably don't like that question.
I have that talent. But when you think about their ability to continue to wage war, do you think that the energy prices as they are today and potential sanctions are starting to bite?
Well, I think not. I think that the oil cap has not really had, it was a very interesting, important construction. It's reduced their revenue somewhat. But, now we're in just such a different mix where, what President Trump, clearly he says it, he uses that word, he wants a deal. And so at the one hand, there's talk lifting sanctions. On the other hand, there was talk just the other day of secondary sanctions and a new thing, secondary tariffs on Russian oil, because people know that's the revenue stream that keeps Russia at war. I think Putin his strategy is he doesn't care that maybe 800,000 Russians have been killed or wounded. He's determined to just wait it out and wait for the Ukrainians to run out of steam, for the support to become more fragmented. So he's playing a waiting game at great...
Whose time runs out first?
Well, let me say a waiting game at great human cost.
Yes, which doesn't seem to faze him.
Doesn't faze him at all. I mean, he's, I think one of the questions will always be, we will never know the answer, is how much did his isolation during COVID lead to this? Because if he'd been meeting prime ministers and presidents and CEOs instead of, as you know, where you had to wait 2 weeks in a hotel in Moscow.
I did.
Yeah, I know, you did. I know. That's why I mentioned it.
In isolation.
Yeah.
Well, it was either that or meet him across a very long table.
Yeah.
So I took the lesser of what seemed to be two evils.
And so he's with very few people, and one person's obsession can, really change the course of the world, and he's done that to a considerable degree.
When it comes to energy, the same question could be applied to Europe, because as Donald Trump has signaled, at least thus far, he's not interested in continuing to fund European defense. In your mind, how difficult is this going to be for Europe to foot the bill?
Yeah, I think it's that's where they're going to have to face the trade-offs. That's why, they're going to basically one of the big things is, okay, you've been putting money in energy transition, you're going to have to put more money, and you're going to have to get organized. And by the way, it's not a single nation. It's 27 countries plus Britain for everybody to reorient their policies and to collaborate, not across as the United States state borders, but national borders. It's a big challenge, but I think it really seems that the Europeans are serious about this and realize now that they, have to do it. I mean, this has been called an obsession of Donald Trump, and that they're not paying their share.
Yes.
And and that applied to Canada too. And so they're I would say they're scrambling right now.
Yes, almost like the grasshopper that sang all summer.
I don't know that story.
Well, it didn't end well for him.
Oh.
In my mind, when you take a step back and think about this with regards to Europe specifically, okay, they know they're in real trouble. Donald Trump has signaled that the United States is not going to be there for them necessarily. What do they do next? Because there's been a lot of talk over the years about a single market for energy. Is that, in your mind, feasible?
Well, I mean, there's a single market for natural gas. I don't know if that's what people point to more is a single market in terms of financial single markets and the integration of their markets to get to scale. I think that seems to be, as I understand, more on the agenda. And now they're going to have to do something, actually, to use your language, which we haven't talked about before, a single market for defense.
Yes.
And that takes a lot of mobilization of resources to do that. And it takes political will and ability to collaborate. So those are going to be very important.
When I interviewed President Putin back in 2021, one of the most recent stories was...
that was before, that was not
prior to the invasion.
And that was prior to...
October 2021.
Oh, but it was during COVID, that's right.
Yes, on the tail end of COVID.
That was your 2 weeks in...
Yes, sir, and in Moscow. One of the big stories at that time was how his energy infrastructure was supposedly crumbling because it was melting, because so much of it was based up in the Arctic that it was crumbling, it was melting, the infrastructure needed to be rebuilt. How much of President Putin's energy infrastructure is at risk in your mind in the far north, given the fact that it hasn't been serviced by Western energy companies in these years? And also Greenland. What happens there? Because the question that I've had for the last several years now has been one of defense, security, the story that nobody's talking about until Donald Trump brought it up. But it's also a question of energy.
Well, I think I don't have a clear answer on the Arctic. I don't know what current information there is on it. Obviously, you need to continue you have a natural 3% decline in energy, or 4% every year, so you have to keep investing. And it's one of the questions, have they kept it, and have they had the resources to do that? We don't know that. And so we don't know what the state of the industry. They have a partner who has a lot of capital and has a lot of technical skills, and it's called China. And so, they may have wanted to have China standoffish, but no more. And, and China is a very tough negotiator in terms of on energy, as they've found again and again, including on previous and new pipelines for natural gas to China from Russia. In terms of Greenland, we're just going to see how that has to play out. And, both Denmark and the United States are members of NATO. So
for
now, obviously, one of Vladimir Putin's great dreams is to shatter NATO, and as well as establish a Russian sphere of influence and establish Russia as a great power on the world. And certainly for him, the divisions between, transatlantic unity is something that he's always disliked. I mean, he has a great sense of kind of not retribution, but resentment about the way the Soviet Union collapsed, and that seems to become his leitmotif. And so invading Ukraine, he really severed his economic relations with the West. Now we'll see what kind of settlement happens in Ukraine and on what basis it happens. But
you're not anticipating that happens.
Well, I just say it's volatile. I mean, Donald Trump is determined to do it, and he'll use all of the muscle and tools for, what he said the other day about how angry he was with Putin. This is, he sees this as the great deal, and he sees himself as the great deal maker. And so he'll use all the tools of deal making that he's developed over his whole career to try and get it there.
How do you anticipate this will play out, in the sense that there's the big question about supply and demand, what global growth will look like after the announcement of tariffs, versus
that is the really big question.
Yeah, versus what's actually happening in the market with regards to Iran or with regards to Russia. How do you see this evolving?
Well, that's such a big question. I mean, we'll have to see. The answer on tariffs will not be evident in a day or a week or a month. I mean, there'll be obviously reactions in financial markets, but it will really be what happens over 6 months, what happens over a year, what kind of investment is made in the United States, factories. We won't see the answer on the tariffs in a week or a month or 6 months. It'll really unfold over a period of time, I think. But when we do see investment coming into factories, and there is so much announcements, I might mention, if you watch American television, see all these companies, whether they're U.S. companies or foreign companies that have production in the United States, all doing these ads about how many employees they have. We have 100,000 American employees, et cetera, and suppliers. But the factories that will be built, I mean, this is an age of robotics. They're not going to be...
They're not bringing jobs.
Yeah, they're not in this same way. This is not going to take us back to Detroit or Cleveland or Youngstown, Ohio, a steel town of the 1960s. These are going to be different type of factories. And one of the questions we'll see is the labor force, the skill force that's there to do it, to implement it. So a lot is being announced, and the president wants a lot to be announced. So, $100 billion, $500 billion, $1 trillion, they want to do that. And I've heard the Secretary of Commerce say what we want to do is build a tariff wall around the United States. And kind of going back to the years of William McKinley at the end of the 19th century, which was a very complicated time because you had a couple of major financial panics at the same time. So, what we're seeing, Hadley, is a reversal of a 8 or 9 decade trend that began in 1934 under Franklin Roosevelt to saying that trade, open markets will lead to a better economy, and not to what you had in the Great Depression, to a view that, as the administration sees it, the United States has been taken advantage, even though, of course, the United States has been doing better than any of the other industrial nations. And so we're at a great turn in history.
No doubt an inflection point.
Yeah.
Tell me, from the breadth of your experience, have we been here before in this way?
If you think about turning points, I think one turning point was in the late 1940s when it was recognized that Europe was in really bad shape and the Soviet Union was going to expand. And you had this initiative called the Marshall Plan, which was the origin, by the way, US-led, of the European Union, was led by the United States. I think that was certainly a huge turning point when you really created the beginning of the post-war world order. You had that, then a year or two later you had NATO, and that was kind of the foundation of this rules-based international order that is now in reverse or under
crumbling.
Great pressure. We'll see, but it's one that delivered immense benefits in terms of economic growth around the world, and we'll see if where this new path leads. But it is as you called it, is an inflection point, and it's being led in a very determined way by the new administration. So now the Biden administration was also rather protectionist.
Yes.
So it wasn't like, this all started yesterday.
IRA.
Yeah. Well, the IRA and tariffs, and famously Joe Biden did not invite Tesla and Elon Musk to the electric vehicle summit at the White House in August of 2021, allegedly because it was not a union shop.
Yes.
And so protectionism is not new, but and I think what's made it a great fuel of it now is also it's tied into China. Yeah. And the tension with China and the view of China, which is so different than it was in this country from what it was 15 years ago.
No doubt. And China today, I mean, we talk about supply and demand. Coming into this year, there was the big story, not just about artificial intelligence and what that's going to mean for the energy transition, but also about the state of China's economy. How do you gauge that today?
Well, I think the general view is that the Chinese economy does not have the dynamism it did have, that market forces are sort of in check and waiting to see how the government stimulates the economy.
Which they've so far failed to do.
Yeah, so far not on the scale. They've talked about it, but not on the scale, and the kind of chronic questions about consumer demand. And even the Biden administration was talking about kind of China's, I forgot the term, but over-exporting, exporting their surplus. So trade tensions are even beyond the Trump administration, trade tensions are rising. The Germans, well, you can let in Chinese electric cars and they'll be cheap, but you will ruin your domestic automobile industry, which is, the engine of your economy. So those kind of trade-offs exist right now.
What about AI?
Well, AI is, of course, it's not new, but it's become very new. It's very important for the energy industry. It's changed the relationship. You have this tech industry kind of getting together with an energy industry. They have entirely different time frames.
Entirely different outlooks, in a sense.
Yeah, outlooks. But, we'll see, it's just the AI I use is getting more and more conversational.
Yes.
And everybody says it's transformative, just don't quite know what it's going to transform. But
how are we going to fuel it?
Well, I think we're going to use a lot more natural gas to do it. I think nuclear will, some countries like, the UAE is in good position because it has significant nuclear capacity. I think nuclear comes back, but not in this decade.
Does it come back in Germany?
Well, talk about people making mistakes, shutting down 25% of your electricity supply, partly because you wanted to influence an election in one particular region. A very big and costly mistake. Maybe that will be the last place it comes back. Where small modular reactors, probably in the 2030s, we'll see them. There's so many people working on nuclear, and you're seeing big tech is investing in nuclear. So and venture capital is there, and at least there's. At CERAWeek, at our conference in Houston, we had the governor of Virginia and the head of this fusion company and the state's utilities saying, by 2032, we think we will have a significant, they don't call it a fusion reactor, they call it a fusion machine up and running. So
just all a difference of language.
Yes, difference of language.
Much more palatable.
Yes. So, but I think this is a really big deal for the energy industry. Of course, there'll be an incentive for those in the data center business and the chip business to seek to become more efficient, but the scale looks like it's going to be enormous, and that's, as I say, part of the reason that we really are being forced to rethink the energy transition.
Dan Yergin, it's wonderful to have you on Al Arabiya. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be with you again. Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Rizkan Show for empowering conversation.
Welcome back to the dressing room with Al Arabiya News. We got Jolien here. Listen, man, let's get into some football. This week's football, yeah. Bit of got your old team here. You played in enough of these derbies.
Merseyside derby.
The Merseyside derby, Liverpool v Everton.
Spicy.
Let's talk about you in those derbies, because it's a spicy derby, isn't it?
Yeah,
I've always admired those type of derbies, because it's one of them ones where you just look at it, you don't know how it feels until you're in it or you're in the stadium.
Unless you're there, you don't really know.
No, you can't get that feel for it on the TV.
Well, I think the last derby at Goodison, because it was the last one at Goodison, I think that was probably the closest we've seen to any derby. I think like the ref let it go a bit, and it was nice.
Tarkowski got the goal last minute. Lovely.
But my first derby, we won 3-0 at Goodison, but that was the first time I'd been to a game at any derby and seen the fans sit together.
What?
Yeah, the fans were mixed. Like the derby back then, I don't know if it's still the case now, but like, so obviously a husband and wife or children, like you got two kids, they could be, so they wasn't like, and I was looking in the crowd, I'm seeing red, I'm like, what's going on here? But like it was calm. It wasn't like an aggressive thing, but I think over the time and then it changed a little bit. But I don't think that happens now.
What's it like before the game? Because for me,
build
obviously
up.
at Chelsea, the derbies you played in, but for me, the biggest one I noticed when I went to Sunderland on loan, Sunderland and Newcastle, it was the atmosphere before the game. It was crazy.
I think the impact on the atmosphere is depending on how frequent the derby is. I did a Wolves West Brom one, FA Cup last year, just like TV working, and it hadn't happened for 10 years.
Really?
We had to stop because they're not in the same league or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
So you'd think it was so aggressive. Like you had to stop for 7 minutes because there was crowd trouble. I'm thinking, what's going on here? It was so violent. But you forget when it's not happened.
Was that at Wolves?
No, it was at the Hawthorns. But when it hasn't happened, obviously then it has a different emotion attached to it. So
that's like
it's mad.
That's crazy because like when you think about these derbies, like look, I always look at the old Firm.
Oh,
the old Firm derby, and I went up to obviously play up at Celtic, and I didn't get to play that in that derby.
I bet that's different.
No, because they were Rangers.
Rangers
were relegated. Rangers were relegated at the time.
Oh yeah.
So
that was wild.
I didn't get to see it.
I played in the Masters up there.
Yeah.
That was bad.
I done the Masters up there too.
So I can imagine what the old Firm.
Actually, I done the Masters. I played for Celtic. I scored against Rangers. So I done my job.
Yeah.
I went to the end of my career.
Yeah, but they still lord you for that.
If I scored again, I'd be hiding.
I went to watch Kevin Muscat when he left Wolves. We went to his first Old Firm. Yeah, that's the most aggressive.
It's aggressive.
Oh my God, I didn't feel right in the crowd. Yeah, man, in the crowd, man, that weren't comfortable.
Man, there's so much needle in it.
Yeah, that was
crazy.
spicy.
It's
spicy. It's a park so far away, and it was mad.
How do you think we're gonna go with this Liverpool v Everton game? Would you think, because it's one of them ones where you just don't know? Because
I think if it was
like called the last game,
I think the break come at a good time for Liverpool.
Yeah,
I think the week they had before.
Yeah.
So now it's a regroup and refocus.
Yeah.
I think Everton needed it for the sake of Liverpool. They needed it.
They'll have that feeling, Liverpool. Like,
I don't want to get their own back.
Do them now.
They
didn't win the game. Remember, Everton didn't win the game. They drew it.
Yeah, but they just needed not to lose at Goodison, the last one. It's like the first one at the new stadium.
Yeah.
You don't need to win. Just don't lose. Just don't lose it, man. Yeah, you know what I mean.
When you say it like that,
for Evertonians, like for it not to be an Evertonian to score the last goal.
Yeah,
at Goodison. Yeah, that would have been sickening. So
oh, mate, you're right. There. The next game up this week, Brighton v Villa.
Oh, good game.
That is
good footballing game.
They're going for top because the top
Brighton.
Four. They're there and around it. There's like two points different from 7th to
I know. It's really tight.
And then even from 10th is only like 4 or 5 points.
And it's going to be top 5 this year.
Yeah,
Champions League.
Yeah, so, it's top 5 this year.
Well, I think it's highly likely due to all the teams doing well. But yeah, it's mad.
So obviously
I don't know who wins that.
Don't know, man. Like very, very good. Young manager, Brighton manager, unbelievable that he's.
They need some credit.
You think he's gonna last though? Like
I think
being that young.
Yeah, I think he'll last. It's whether someone comes and gets him, like the previous 2 managers. Do you know what I mean? Like whatever they're doing something well, and they're recruiting and recognizing the transition. They're transitioning very well.
Yeah,
seamlessly.
That's interesting. Like I see it. I think
he's always. I was there near the end of my career. And Tony Bloom, they very much go on stats.
Oh yeah,
100%. It's like the Moneyball thing.
And they've done really well because we probably should have, or we were in the playoffs, but we didn't. We underperformed against Palace.
I was about to say you played Palace there.
Yeah,
Zaha.
That's a derby.
I remember.
It was the home game. We threw it away. We should have beat them on the away game, but we threw it away. But they're very, very smart man. Recruited so well. Like
100%.
Well, and they're still doing well.
Well, they made 100 million out of Casado straight like that.
And but no disrespect to the players, I think it's easier to do it when you're operating it in that realm. I don't think you can do that and win the league.
No.
Because now you got to pick and you compete with players that everyone can see.
Yeah, I get what you're
everyone
saying.
can see all them like
where they are.
You can get a gem.
Yeah.
And it can work, but there's no one unknown.
Yeah,
in the trap teams, is there?
No, everyone knows. Yeah,
we know you.
Yeah,
I've seen you
know
before.
What you're about.
Yeah, I've seen Mbappe. I know what he can do.
That's a totally different ball game. All right, Chelsea v Spurs.
Oh,
that's a big derby,
it's a big one.
Yeah,
the Chelsea Spurs game. It's
is
always
that Chelsea's biggest?
Is that Chelsea?
There's always a
Arsenal's a big one.
Tottenham as well. Tottenham. I always
Chelsea,
thought Liverpool.
Liverpool.
We hate. When I was there, we wanted to win, mate. Yeah, Tottenham.
That's the one I hear Chelsea talk about the most.
Yeah, I'd say so. When I was there, I think so. You definitely didn't want to lose to Tottenham.
What would Coley say right now?
Oh, he hates
3 points late.
Yeah, 3 points late. Do you know what they better do? Because to stay there. Is it like they should get it? In my opinion,
but Chelsea are home obviously in this game. So
you got Newcastle with a game in hand.
Yeah,
they go above them, and then it's so tight. That's a must-win game.
I think Cole's back now. I think Cole's fit again.
Yeah.
He can be a game changer.
Yeah, he could be the catalyst for them because he's a top talent in it. Like when I think are Man City regretting that decision, letting him go now?
No.
They've got so many players. And
Like,
It
they
was
never
good
got
for him,
anyone,
maybe.
yeah, and he wouldn't have been able to
Break
produce
in.
that.
Yeah.
He would have broke in because he wouldn't have
playing
been
week in, week out.
and he would have been a 10. He would have been a winger
Yeah, that's
for
true.
Man City. He wouldn't like.
Yeah.
It's the same as Phil when Phil first come through and people saying he's got to play. He's like, why? David Silva's playing. Like
Yeah.
Kevin De Bruyne was playing. Cole Palmer's not
He's-
going to play.
that's
is he? Do
true,
you know what I
yeah,
mean?
that's true.
He's probably one of my favourite players in that England setup because I feel like
Cole.
when I look at him,
You
I
don't
feel
care.
like he's the only one who plays that he's still playing on the park.
Oh yeah,
And
That's
like
his
he has
style.
no care and he
Yeah.
just plays.
That's his style. He has a fearless thing that I don't know if you can create that in players.
You
Yeah.
just got to have that up there.
Nonchalant. That's
just-
what.
That's
I
why
mean.
for
have
me
it.
that's one of the most important things. You
Well,
gotta
let's
try
look
and
at the
instill from a young
Spurs team.
age.
Let's look at the Spurs team. Like, for me, what's going on down there? Because like we look at it, right?
They've had so much airtime on this
Like,
podcast.
so Ange is over there. Obviously, is he gonna last? Is he? You know what I mean? Like, this is a
In
big
terms of
game.
what?
This is a big game, yeah. Because this can give you 5 games at least to like.
No, I
security.
don't. I still believe
No?
they
I still
keep
think
him.
he's there next
Europe-
season.
Depends how they do in Europe.
Do you think?
Yeah, I think if they go out.
Well,
was it next round?
who do they get in then?
Like, that's
that's
a different thing. That's a different
I
question.
just feel like if he's lasted this long,
Nah.
why let him get?
They get the
next
Brighton
season
manager
and
in. That's
sack
what they're
him?
gonna get.
Because I feel
Maybe.
Levy might have learnt from when Mourinho, like he was close to winning something. Mourinho in the final.
Oh, come on.
You got a chance.
Yeah, that was.
I don't care who you're
mad.
playing.
I
You
can't
got a chance.
believe he
So
done that.
I think he might be thinking, do I disrupt it now? And he's doing well in Europe, isn't he? They're doing well in Europe.
Yeah.
So it's
It
it's
is an
silverware.
interesting thing
Yeah,
that he's got. He has to come up trumps, because I think even the last game.
I think he leaves. I think they part ways
Yeah.
in the summer,
Yeah,
regardless.
I
though.
think he can't deal with that stress no
I
more.
don't. I just think both of them. And like
You know what? It looked like to me, because he was saying some things in the media that was making me think, does he want to get sacked or something? Like the way he was. The
It's
way
new
he
for him
was
though, innit? It's new for him.
wording the words were.
Yeah, but
like,
I think he says how it is sometimes.
Yeah,
But that's
and he
like-
was fine when you're winning.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
refreshing. But when it's the first time he's ever experienced what he's experiencing,
mate,
them answers aren't as enjoyable. all them questions aren't as
To
enjoyable.
be fair, the other week we said he needs a night out with us.
He
Like,
don't
he
need
feel
to
like
wind
he needs
down a
night
bit,
out.
does he? He looks stressed, man.
Yeah.
I'm telling you. But yeah, so those are like the 3 main games, and I'm thinking, I'm just gonna go say it now. I'm going Liverpool win, yeah, against Everton. I'm going Villa win against Brighton. I know they're away. I know. But I'm going Chelsea win over Spurs because they're at home.
Yeah, I think so.
So it's just the way it is for me.
I don't know, but yeah, I think Liverpool. I don't know about Brighton. I don't know. I'll
No?
say draw. I'll
You
say
say the
draw,
draw,
and
yeah?
then I'll say Chelsea.
Okay, because I'm thinking Villa, especially off the back of the game the other day. I'm thinking definitely they're
Yeah, but
they're
they might
purring.
have-
They're
But
purring.
they might have to just rest a few because they got Champions League man next
Yeah,
week.
yeah, yeah.
It's
Oh, yeah, that's
PSG.
true.
It's PSG next week. So, yeah, some of me might like. And
By the way, are you gonna rest? Doesn't matter if you
Not
rest
rest.
anyone. Like, I don't think you need to rest anyone, but they need to think about
Yeah,
the
they
next
might need.
game.
They definitely need to consider because
that's
some of
a
the positions
massive
I don't think they got replacement in every position.
Are you gonna be at that game? You gonna be?
Nah, I'm watching it though. 100%
Oh,
watching
mate,
it.
do you know what? That's going to be an interesting game.
They're a good team, man. PSG. I've seen them a few times.
PSG are purring at the
excited.
moment.
They're the
They're
best. They're the best
excited,
they've been
aren't
for
they?
years. Them.
Do you know
Best
Joe
team.
picked him out
I know he did.
before the game? He was getting battered.
Before Liverpool.
Yeah,
I know.
he was
I heard it. I was
getting
like, Joe, yeah, and I was like, okay. I had to
Yeah.
give him some props. We did
Yeah.
we did a show the other week, and I was like, to be fair, Joe, you're the first person I
Yeah,
heard.
yeah, you're the only
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
All right, listen. Let's move on, right? Because whilst I was away, I saw this. Right, I couldn't believe my eyes. Yeah? Couldn't believe it. The Toons, yeah, the Toon Army had something to cheer about for once, right? They get to the final. They beat the big dogs in the final, and they actually get to lift the trophy for the first time, I think, in 70 years.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Like, really and truly, like for me, Newcastle, because I've always admired Newcastle and their fan base and the players that they've had. I thought they'd won loads of stuff, but they obviously ain't. And I'm thinking, this is the first time. How many people were there? 300,000.
It's a lot.
300,000 people turned up for the parade, you know? And I know, yeah, it's only League Cup.
Nah,
Yeah?
nah.
But wait. People try to pee on my parade. Yeah. A lot of people when West Ham lift up the Conference League, yeah, and I had the privilege to obviously me and Joe had the privilege to do the BT Sport coverage, and for me, my proper first season doing punditry on TV, I'm getting to go to a final. Yeah, man. That's what dreams are made of, right? 100%. I remember, and then after we came and saw you guys over in
Istanbul.
It was unbelievable, man. So I just love to see what Newcastle do you know what it is? Newcastle, the fans, they appreciate it. They've actually revived the love for that League Cup. And I've said kudos to them. What do you think about the game?
I'm here for it.
Did you watch the game?
Oh, mate, I'm buzzing. I'm like, I don't like to appear in your parade. I'm like, you've won something, mate.
Yeah.
It's jealousy. You ain't won it.
Yeah.
Do you know how many people poo on people's parade and say they poo it and say, listen, it's only a League Cup.
Nah, man.
But
mate,
bro,
you'd all take
silverware.
Every team would take it.
Every year. I'll take it every year.
It's great to see that enjoyment, that many people out. That's what football's all about.
Yeah.
Mm. And when you look at you saw the celebrations, and I'm seeing Isaac trying to speak Toon. It was so funny, but it's brilliant. That's what you want to see.
Man.
You want to see characters. And man, good luck to them. So well done, Newcastle, on your feats and everything that you've done for the club. Isaac, is he gonna last there? Is he gonna stay? Because he's such a baller. Do you know what I mean?
There's only a few teams that can afford it. Yeah. Like there's not many teams that can afford it.
Arsenal?
No.
No, Harry Kane's going Arsenal.
I've just heard Arsenal got a massive kitty for the summer.
It doesn't matter.
No.
Arsenal, he ain't going to Arsenal.
No.
That would be surprised.
Would he go abroad?
I think Liverpool come in.
Liverpool, you reckon? Yeah.
I think Liverpool come for him. If I was Liverpool, I would try and sign him.
That's a big shot.
They need someone that's going to share that load, man. Salah isn't going to score 30 goals every season. There's going to be a time when you need someone to just take a little 15.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah,
someone to share that.
Yeah, you're right.
A little 15.
You're right.
A little 20 piece.
Yeah. But Salah there at the end of the season? I don't think so.
You think he goes?
I think he goes. I think Salah leaves. So yeah, you're right. I think they're going to need an Isaac.
I don't know if he. I don't know, man.
That's another one.
I think it's too hard to call.
What would you do if you? What do you like? What do you think?
If I was him?
No, not him. If you just a betting man, you're going to say this is.
He goes, man.
I don't know.
Trent.
I don't like. It's that Saudi money, mate.
The thing for me,
Saudi money, but it's.
That isn't even Saudi money. It's different money. That you're saying you're giving him the Neymar contract. Like 800 million.
Come on, man. You're taking it. You gotta go. You'll be silly not to. I'd frown upon you if you didn't take it. You know. Yeah. And I think. Look,
800 million's a lot.
It's a lot,
bro.
It's a lot. Billy, man.
To be fair, do you remember when it all started and Southgate was talking about? I think he did it TalkSport, and they said, "Listen, everyone can say they wouldn't do it. No one can say they wouldn't do it until you're offered that money. Until you see that contract, and you'll say there's 800 million tax free."
I'll tell you what, if he stays though. Liverpool fans are going to absolutely.
He's lauded.
Mate.
He's lauded. Yeah. He goes down as
already.
No, but more so.
Even more though.
He could be like Stevie.
Do you reckon?
Yeah, massively.
Yeah, I think.
Massively.
Yeah, I think they see that if he does that, he's on par with Stevie and maybe like the players before that. I don't really know the levels like Dalglish and them.
Yeah, Dalglish. Yeah,
them guys.
Ian Rush.
Them guys, mate.
Yeah, different.
He's going to be seen different.
Yeah, so obviously you got that. But the thing about me, so let's go back to Liverpool. When I look at Liverpool now, I think Salah goes. I think obviously we already know about Trent. Trent's gone. The most important cog in that wheel over there is Van Dijk. It's Van Dijk. Don't you think? You're not having that shot. Van Dijk stays though.
No. Listen, I think it's important that he stays. But if they don't have Van Dijk or they don't have Salah this season.
Oh yeah, of course.
There you go.
Yeah.
So it can't be Van Dijk. If you take one of them players out for the whole season.
No, Van Dijk stays. For me.
But just say you took out Van Dijk now.
Yeah.
So you took him out.
That would.
But you kept Salah. You're still winning games. They're not scoring.
Yeah,
no one in their team is scoring.
Yeah,
20 goals.
You're stopping goals go in. So yeah, you've got a chance to win the game. Yeah. But Van Dijk, I think, is the most important.
Well, I don't.
You don't,
because Salah guarantees you 20 goals.
I think you could get an Isak, as you just said. He can come in 20 goals.
Isak ain't a Salah.
No,
he's not.
No, I'm not saying that
He
he's
might be
not,
a Salah
but
with. He might be with Salah.
Yeah, but he ain't.
Yeah,
but I
no
think
one
he
just
gets you
comes and
20
just
goals.
wears a cape.
I think he gets you 20 goals.
I'm not saying he doesn't, but
I think he
listen,
gets
if they
20
sell, but they're not selling Salah, are they? If they don't
They're
keep
not selling
Salah
him.
and
I
keep,
think he does get you goals, but you're slotting into a team which then doesn't have Trent and Salah.
I'm just saying, I think they lose too. I think Salah goes, and I think Trent. Obviously, Trent.
if they can get Isak and keep Van Dijk, then
then it's all right.
You've
Then
done all
they're
right.
back.
You've done all right.
Okay,
you're
that's fair
maintaining it. But if you're losing
Salah and
if you're losing Van Dijk and keeping Salah, I think there's centre halves you can get because Konate, I think he's unreal. I think he's
Konate,
yeah, I think he's unreal.
No, I think he's got potential.
No, I don't think he's. I think
You
it's
think he's
quality.
the main man?
I think he's the main man because Van Dijk's the main man. But listen, I think he's way better than what he's being
people give
credited
him credit for.
Yeah, he's way better.
Okay, fair enough.
And
Listen,
get a rubbing.
do you want to talk about your DJing? Can we talk about?
Talk about it, yeah.
So listen,
You've been up to a lot since you retired, didn't you?
Yeah, I'm trying a lot.
Yeah.
Trying a lot of stuff.
So we have a DJ on our hands here. Yeah. Listen, I tried my hands on DJ, and I was an MC back in the day. They used to call me Juvenile C.
Juvenile C.
They used to call. Listen, mate.
Because you were childish.
Yeah.
Go on,
Juvenile.
give us something quick.
Enter. Put the wicked chat.
Garage MC.
Oh, Garage, man.
Times.
That was my days, man. Garage.
Yeah, mate.
And then I got into like the DJing part because obviously I can't be doing the MCing thing, and I actually DJ'd in central London with guess who? Just guess.
Is it a known DJ?
No, he's a footballer.
A footballer. Oh, ooh.
Yes.
Darren Bent.
No, I was gonna say a big DJ.
He's not big, but he's a DJ.
Oh, he's actually a DJ.
No, he's a footballer.
But he's a DJ.
He DJs.
Jubel CC or
No.
Stuart Downing.
No, who?
You know Stuart Downing's a big DJ. You didn't know
Stuart Downing.
Bro.
Is he?
Not having that.
Is he? I didn't know
Stuart
that.
Downing is a DJ.
Stuart Downing.
No way. Eh?
Bruce Dyer.
No.
Yeah, Sean Newton and Bruce Dyer.
Hold on, wait. Stuart Downing. What music does he play?
House, yeah.
Does he?
Yeah,
Does he?
I'm gonna have to check that out.
That's why he's always in Ibiza.
Yeah.
No wonder.
I'll tell you who else.
It's all adding up.
Massive DJs. Random name. Steve Davis, the snooker player.
What? What am I hearing?
This is what
Mate,
I'm saying.
how hard is it? How
learn.
hard is it to learn?
To learn, it's kind of tough. Yeah, it depends on what you want to do, what your skill set is. But like, I want to be good, so I'm respected. Like, not just get gigs because I'm an ex-footballer.
Yeah.
So, learning, it's like you just got to put that. Like anything, you just put the hours in. And, but
Put the hours in.
producing.
Oh, you're
Making
doing that as well.
music.
You're doing that.
I'm just trying to learn now.
What type of music are we doing?
Like house and that.
House.
When you're comfortable,
Funky
me and
house.
Colin,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
want to come up and make a tune.
Yeah.
Funky house tech. What?
Yeah.
Tech.
Funky house is not
Funky
a thing.
house.
Like we used to call it.
Funky
yeah,
house.
it's not
Yeah, what's
really,
it called now? It's like soulful house or tech
deep
house.
house,
Tech house.
minimal,
No, tech house.
yeah, minimal
I
and
don't
all
even
that.
know what I like.
But
I just like going and listening to something.
Yeah.
I like it.
I'll send you some mixes that I've done, but yeah, it's like the closest to like the garage feeling.
Yeah,
the vibes and like the
that's what I
vocally
want.
kind of.
Yeah.
I'm well interested to see what you come up with. I'd love to.
So
I'd
you
love
still
to make a tune.
You ain't guessed to the footballer yet, though.
No.
Okay.
Sure, right, Phillips.
Oh, you're right.
Oh, is it? Yeah,
right.
I remember when I was playing. Actually, the end he was always into it.
We went back to back in central London, bro.
Yeah, right. I forgot about Righty.
Back to back.
Yeah. Righty does it. Yeah.
We went Aura. Remember Aura? Yeah, we went back to back in
He
Aura.
got into house music, didn't he?
Yeah. And he was producing.
Yeah.
He was actually making songs. He went for a stage where he was just making tunes.
On PlayStation back in the day. Remember them times?
Who is your favourite DJ? Not that I know
EZ.
those DJs. EZ.
DJ EZ.
Yeah.
Oh my God, he's like.
Yeah.
I went. To
His
a
technical abilities like.
Oh, it's mad.
Like Messi.
Yeah.
When now I know what they're capable of, and I hear him and I see him.
Yeah.
And like my friend went to a thing in Birmingham a few weeks ago, and he sent me the video, and he sent me the clip, and he was like playing garage. It was unreal. I said, but you have no clue what he's actually doing.
He's
like,
mad.
He's not just playing songs like everyone else would play songs. He's playing the decks and that.
The
I'm
decks,
like, oh
doing
my
it, it's
God.
the mixing it.
My favourite is Fortet. Like his music's very different to going to see him live.
Fortet.
Mate, Fortet. Every time I've gone, I've loved it. I've seen him like 6-7 times.
Yeah,
mate, it's just different for me. It's different to anything else I've been to.
Yeah,
You
DJ.
know, you know what? Like when you think about it, like, I'm a funky house man, garage man. That's what I want. Yeah. That's if I could.
Mate, I've seen you happy listening to most things we go to.
No, but that is that's my bag.
That's your main
If I
thing.
could make a song or one tune that's me done. So please start the process so I can get on it.
Come on, just please let us have a little go.
You
learn everything, and then we just come along.
Ad-lib some vocals.
I'll just have a little.
I'd love to throw some beats together and come up with a tune.
Yeah. And that would be like, that's history.
Makes people feel good.
Literally that. So it just makes me feel like the feeling I get from doing it and DJing is like so close to the feeling I got when playing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, man.
I know. I was saying the other day to Matt, I said, why does everyone go and watch sport? Do you mean someone always goes away miserable, don't they? Someone happy.
Yeah.
Go to a little
happy.
Go to a little music festival, everyone goes away happy.
Yeah. But I feel like there'll be nothing rewarded if I could make one song.
Maybe the best thing ever. And to see people just
play at my funeral. Oh, perfect.
Funky house at his funeral. This guy.
I don't want no one crying. I want everyone to be happy, and I've made a song, and I've left it for the future. That's brilliant. But listen, I think we could wrap it up there then, boys. And listen, it's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for coming on, and it's been brilliant. Great insight as usual. And I knew that we should have you on. Remember, I actually texted you. No, I messaged you. I said, when you coming on, bruv? And then, look, we're here. Straight away, 1 week later. Manifested it, man. And you're here now. So, Anyway, this was the Dressing Room podcast with Al Arabiya News. Goodbye. See you next week.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's program, the Israeli Defense Minister announces a major expansion of military operations in Gaza. Well, today marks exactly 1 month since Israel blockaded all aid from entering the enclave. On what has been dubbed Liberation Day, we ask, what will President Trump's barrage of reciprocal tariffs mean for the average consumer, and could this spark a global recession? Plus, we're going to be speaking to the British TV presenter James May and asking him what's true and what's not true about rumoured reunions with former Top Gear co-hosts Jeremy Clarkson and Richard Hammond. Hello and welcome. First, Israel has announced a major expansion of its military operations in Gaza. Well, the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, says that the army will be seizing parts of the Palestinian territory, and he confirmed that Israel would, quote, seize large areas that will be incorporated into Israeli security zones. Well, all the while, Egypt, Qatar and the United States are once again attempting to broker a ceasefire deal and secure the release of the remaining Israeli hostages still being held in Gaza. Well, let's get more analysis so we can speak to Chuck Freilich, who is the former Israeli Deputy National Security Advisor and Professor and Senior Fellow at INSS. That's the Institute for National Security Studies. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Professor, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We've heard from the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, saying there's going to be a major expansion, he said, of military operations in Gaza. What's your understanding of what the rationale is for this expansion?
Well, I think that there are two primary ones. One is an attempt to force Hamas into reaching a hostage deal on better terms. And the other one is part of the longer-term overall strategy of trying to weaken Hamas, potentially dismantle it as the governing body in Gaza. And I mean, they have partly reconstituted in the period since the ceasefire began. So to weaken them again militarily as well.
So, I mean, it's been sort of 17 months of warfare in Gaza. I mean, it's very difficult to imagine what's left of Hamas. I mean, we've been told time and time again they've been severely degraded, but now we're being told that they're sort of making some sort of a resurgence. I mean, what is your understanding?
Well, they were severely degraded. They are severely degraded, but they weren't completely destroyed militarily. You have to understand that for organizations like Hamas or Hezbollah, for that matter, there is really no such thing as defeat. Unless you can kill every last one of them, which isn't realistic, then they will never concede. And it takes whatever amount of time it takes for them to begin military operations once again, which is what happened here. So when I said before that they're reconstituting, yes, they are. But it's still at a low level. But if Israel doesn't deal with it now, it'll gradually become greater and greater. And they will eventually rebuild to the pre-war capability.
I mean, this is obviously devastating news, according to the hostage members' families. They have a forum called the Hostages and Missing Families Forum. They've said, quote, has it been decided to sacrifice the hostages for the sake of territorial gains? They seem to think that freeing the hostages has not been shown as the top priority. What do you say to that?
Well, it's not just the hostage families. Many people in Israel share that feeling that this government has not made the hostages their number one priority. Israel's history, it's part of its national security strategy was always what people perceived as an unwavering commitment to save Israeli citizens, whether it was nearby or even going to Entebbe if necessary. And so, yes, a lot of people share the feeling that this has not been the case today. And we see the demonstrations in Tel Aviv and around the country. It's a widespread sentiment.
And Professor, we also heard from the defense minister today saying that the Israeli army is going to seize what he said would be large areas of Palestinian territory that are going to be incorporated into Israeli security zones. I mean, do you think this is a long-term or even a permanent arrangement?
Well, it'll depend on various developments, on what Hamas does, on which government is in office in Israel. The elections will be no later than a year and a half from now, possibly earlier. Look, the real question is who is going to establish a stable, peaceful Gaza? And it's clear that that's not the case while Hamas is still there. Now, I don't know that they can be completely destroyed militarily. And you're saying, well, after 17 months, yes, it's been a long time. It's hard to imagine that there is some great new trick up Israel's sleeve that will change the situation fundamentally. We may be in for a situation for considerable amount of time now where there are ups and downs. There'll be lows, there'll be periods of relative quiet, and then there will be periods when Israel will feel that it has to go in again to cut Hamas back down to size.
Back in February, we heard the defense minister announcing plans for overseeing what he called the voluntary departure of Palestinians from Gaza. I mean, when you hear that and you hear plans for taking territory from Gaza and incorporating it into Israeli territory, do you think we are looking at the start of this plan to relocate 2.4 million Gazan inhabitants? And where do you think they're supposed to go?
I don't know that there's any serious discussion of reincorporating parts of Gaza into Israel. But there is discussion of trying to implement President Trump's proposal on a voluntary basis. Look, without saying anything about the final resolution of Gaza, part of a two-state solution or whatever, Gaza in its current borders, given its huge population, huge for the size of the territory, its population rate doubles about every 20 years. So that today we're talking 2.4 million, let's say. So 20 years from now, we're talking 4.5 million, and 20 years after that, it's 9 million. Gaza isn't viable in a long-term sense in its current borders. So you either have to take an approach such as the one that was presented by Trump of trying to reduce the population, whether in the way that he said, or maybe some people want to move to the West Bank, or you have to change the size of Gaza's territory. And there's a long-standing, very interesting proposal for a multilateral land swap, which would double Gaza's size. Egypt gives Gaza land, Israel compensates the Egyptians, and the Palestinians agreed that for Israel to annex an equal-sized piece of land in the West Bank. And so actually in this scenario, no one has gained or lost net territory, but the Palestinians get territory where they really need it, Gaza, and Israel gets additional territory that it needs to be able to incorporate most of the settlers into Israeli territory.
What sort of a time frame will we be looking at for a plan of that nature, do you think? When could we see that become a reality?
Well, I'm not personally very optimistic that we're going to see a lot of forward progress on the peace process, certainly for the foreseeable future. I don't think that there is any Palestinian leader today who is capable of doing so. The Israeli government is not capable of doing so today. So I think we need to see a leadership change on both sides before we can see significant progress. And the proposal that I was talking about now, that idea also requires that Egypt agree to participate. In the past, Egypt has turned the idea down. I'm somewhat more hopeful that Egypt might be willing to give it more favorable consideration today.
I mean, when it comes to sort of plans and mapping out a way forward, I mean, today is a sad anniversary for people in Gaza because it marks exactly a month since food has been, and aid has been cut off to the Gaza Strip. No flour, no bread, no fresh water in some places. I mean, we are looking at possible hunger looming in some areas of the Gaza Strip, if not the whole Gaza Strip. I mean, is there a plan, or do you get the impression that the Israeli government sort of changes its ideas and its approach to the problems one day to the next?
First of all, there have been, I think, overstated claims of starvation, of famine in Gaza since the war broke out. By Gazans, by international aid organizations. If all of the statements had been accurate, then nobody would be left alive in Gaza today. Everyone would have starved. Now, I'm not trying to say that this situation isn't very difficult in Gaza. It is. But I don't think we're talking starvation. We're talking socioeconomic pressure on people. The other thing is people say, well, why is Israel doing this? The real question should be, why is Hamas doing this to its own people? Why did it start the war? Why does it still have 59 hostages 17 months later? Why is it continuing to fire rockets at Israel? Why are they reconstituting? Why don't they step down and allow a new and forward-seeking, peace-seeking government in Gaza to emerge? The people who are most responsible for Gazan suffering is Hamas.
Very hard to explain that to children who've lost one or both parents, siblings, and who are having to go to bed on empty stomachs, not for the first time this last month, but throughout these last 17 months. I mean, shouldn't Israel take the high ground here?
Well, I wouldn't use food as a significant source of leverage. And again, I don't think anyone is is starving. It's hard very much to calibrate these things in a effective but still humane way. Again, the onus for resolving the problem should be placed on Hamas. Israel has no desire to make anyone in Gaza starve. No desire to do that. It's one of the ways. I mean, no one wants to see Israel use military force, okay? Don't use socioeconomic pressure. What are you left with? There aren't many things that you can do. So I think, again, we have to go back to the source of the problem.
A lot of aid groups we've spoken to would beg to differ on the issue of the famine situation, the starvation situation in Gaza, but neither of us are there. So let's move on. Hamas reported to have put forward a new ceasefire proposal to the Israelis. Few details have been made public. Are you hearing anything about that? And how would you expect the Israeli government to respond to that plan?
Well, I don't think we know the details of either the Israeli plan or the Hamas response, so I don't want to speculate. Just to say that it seems that both sides have an interest in a deal, and I hope we can reach one.
And just lastly, Professor, I want to ask you about this so-called Qatar Gate, something that's been gaining, quite a lot of traction, making quite a lot of headlines in Israel and beyond. This is with regards to alleged links between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's aides and parties in Qatar that have financed them in exchange for favourable coverage. I'm just wondering how serious you think Qatar Gate is for the Israeli leadership.
Well, we'll see. The judicial process has begun. Two of his aides, one of whom is apparently the person closest to him today, have been arrested and are in jail. Others have been called to testify, and we'll see. I think the Prime Minister's response indicates that he is concerned about this. It's not something that he can just brush off. We'll see how it plays out. It's certainly a major legal challenge for him.
OK, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Professor Chuck Froelich, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Well, stay with us here. We'll be back in just a moment talking about the US President Donald Trump's barrage of reciprocal tariffs and asking what will they mean for the average consumer.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Welcome back. The US President Donald Trump has unveiled what's been described as reciprocal tariffs, taxes on imported goods from a broad range of countries. Well, that's with the goal of penalizing those countries for trade barriers of their own. Well, in the context of these new tariffs, the Trump administration is branding today as Liberation Day. Well, President Trump has already slapped import levies on products from Mexico, China, and Canada. And President Trump is promising that revenue generated from all these tariffs will be put towards US tax cuts and deficit reduction.
China's an abuser, but the European Union is very, very bad to us. They treat us very, very badly. They don't take our cars. They don't take our cars at all. They don't take our farm products, essentially. They don't take very much. We have a $350 billion deficit with the European Union. They treat us very, very badly. So they're going to be in for tariffs.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Mary Jo Jacoby, former Assistant Secretary of Commerce under President George H.W. Bush. Mary Jo, you also served as a special assistant to President Ronald Reagan. Really good to have you here on Al Arabiya News once again. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. The White House is saying that today, the 2nd of April 2025, is going to go down as being one of the most important days in modern American history. Do you think that's an exaggeration, perhaps?
I actually don't think it's an exaggeration. It is an historic day in many ways. It's not just because of the tariffs being announced later today, but it's also a day when the president will be negotiating tax reform and extension of his tax cuts with Congress in a meeting later this morning. And it's also TikTok Day, where the president will be meeting to decide the fate of that very popular Chinese-owned app.
Okay, but when you hear President Trump saying things along the lines of, America's trade partners have been ripping off the United States, would you tend to agree with that assessment?
I think when you look at the balance of trade, the United States has been running an incredibly large deficit for a long time, and a very large deficit with some very specific countries, not in the Middle East so much, but elsewhere in the world, particularly China, Canada, and Mexico in America's immediate view. And so what the president is seeking to do, as I understand it, is to try and create a rebalance there, which I support. Tariffs can be a very blunt instrument. I understand he's talking with his advisors about whether to just do a permanent universal flat rate somewhere between 15 and 25% on everything versus a case-by-case sort of retaliatory tariff structure, country by country, product by product. If I were advising the president, I'd go for retaliatory. I'm not advising the president, so we'll have to see what he announces later on today.
Okay, you have advised presidents, though, in the past, so your opinion is nevertheless very valuable to us. And just help us understand this. I mean, for people who don't have a very strong grasp of economics and the norms surrounding tariffs, I mean, Americans have obviously got a much higher disposable income than pretty much every other country, certainly the Europeans, and you mentioned the Mexicans and the Canadians. So doesn't it stand to reason that the flow of trade between the United States and those countries should be a little bit lopsided?
Well, in a way, it does stand to reason, but it also is affected by the American consumer's choice. And American consumers have had quite a lot of access to very inexpensive goods manufactured offshore, everywhere from China to Vietnam to Cambodia to India. Just look at the label inside any article of clothing bought in the United States, and it wasn't manufactured here. Over many years, 40 years perhaps, the manufacturing base of the United States has declined, and the American consumer has come to rely more and more on imported goods, cheap imported goods. When it comes to things like automobiles, however, higher-end Americans have chosen higher-end imported automobiles rather than American-manufactured cars. And frankly, it's only Tesla and Rivian who actually manufacture all of their product in America, as opposed to, in many cases, crossing the Canadian or Mexican border many times before a car is finally assembled. So we've come to rely on less expensive imported goods at the expense of our manufacturing capability, which is a strategic capability, as well as manufacturing jobs, which tend to be lower paid union jobs. So a lot of the unions are supporting the president's approach to tariffs. A lot of the consumers are not. And then you have Wall Street and the stock markets, and they don't like uncertainty. And we have been in an uncertain world, knowing that tariffs were coming, but not knowing what those tariffs might be. And I'm hoping that the clarity the president provides today will encourage the markets. There might be a lot of pent-up demand for shares as prices have fallen considerably over the course of the last month. So I'm hoping that there'll be a stock market rally once we have clarity, regardless of what that clarity is.
Okay, so just to wrap up and summarize what you've just said there, good news for factory workers and their job prospects, because this will, we assume, create more factory jobs. Not so sure about the stock market. We'll see how things go on Thursday, during Thursday trade, but US stock index futures down pretty sharply the last day or two. But for consumers, not such good news, you're saying. And that would tie in, it would appear, with a study done by Yale that said that these tariffs could cost the average US household an additional $3,000 to $4,000 US a year. I mean, why would it cost American consumers money in the long run? What's the sort of the calculation that they've made there, do you think?
Well, because the price of anything imported, depending on the nature of the tariffs that the president imposes, anything imported will cost more to bring into the country and therefore more to sell at the coalface to the consumers. And so the consumers will pay. What the president hopes, what I hope, is that through this hopefully short-term pain of rebalancing, where things go up immediately, well, short-term, but balance out long-term, the consumer will get a better deal, the American economy will be stronger, and then when you amplify the tariff approach with the tax cuts that are coming, that the president is negotiating today, overall the consumer will be in better shape later in the year. So a little bit of short-term pain in favor of long-term gain.
Okay, that's viewed from the point of view of US consumers. Now viewed from the point of view of other countries, and we've talked about China, Canada, Europe, Mexico, feeling some heat. I mean, who's going to feel the most heat, do you think, economically as a result of these tariffs? Which countries?
I think certainly China. And of course, you've already seen tariffs imposed on Mexico and Canada. And those are due to expire and will probably be renewed. But again, until we know, and I admire this White House for being able to keep things under wraps for so long. There has not been a leak to my knowledge, and I've been following this very, very carefully. Until we know what kind of tariffs on what and on whom, it's hard to judge who's going to suffer. I think it's safe to say that there will be a lot of pain in the immediate term. Hopefully, there will be a lot of gain in the medium to long term. And I mean this from a worldwide trade perspective, because many of us believe, some of us old schoolers, that the greatest peacekeeping force in the world is the interdependence that comes from trade. And so we're hoping that this rebalancing will not damage those relationships, but will sort of reset the international trading arrangements, which have not been reset for a very, very long time.
So how are countries supposed to respond? I mean, what's President Trump expecting the countries that are going to be the recipients of these pretty heavy tariffs? How's he hoping they're going to respond? Are they supposed to ask to come to the negotiating table? Are they likely, do you think, instead to perhaps get together and step up the heat themselves? What do you think is the next step?
Well, certainly the EU has been orchestrating or attempting to orchestrate a consolidated response on behalf of the member states. Both Canada and Mexico have issued statements saying that they are looking at retaliation rather than confrontation. They want to talk, and they have been talking. And China has retaliated in some cases already and will probably continue to do so, and is taking a more confrontational stance in their announcements over the last few days. So what I hope, and what I believe the administration hopes, the Trump administration, that this will bring people to the table, that they will talk, they will seek an overall rebalance. And I think one criticism that I would level against the administration is the way they've communicated this, because they have not really gotten out in front of the levels of tariffs that other countries impose on American exports. And if that were better understood from an American perspective, I think it would be easier for the American consumer to understand what's happening. But overall, I think worldwide, there's going to be some short-term pain here. I think the countries in the Gulf region are probably in better shape than most because the United States enjoys a trade surplus with many of them. But it's going to really come down to who, how much, and how long.
They're dubbing this Liberation Day there in the United States. Is that how it feels to you, Mary Jo?
It feels like Difference Day to me, a day that we're making a major change in the way the United States has conducted its international economic affairs. I'm not sure it's liberation. I think Liberation Day will come when the U.S. manufacturing base rises and there are more manufacturing jobs and more goods available as made in America. And then we are not so dependent on inexpensive foreign goods. So it feels more like Difference Day to me than necessarily liberation.
And for the rest of the world, do you think we might be looking at the makings of a global recession, as some people are suggesting? And could that in turn boomerang back and have an adverse effect on the US economy?
Certainly, if there's a global recession, it will boomerang. But I am hoping and I believe that this will bring trade partners to the table to act either individually or collectively to work with the United States for a global rebalancing of the trade apparatus, which has existed in its current form for a long, long time.
Okay, so to sum up, I mean, would you say, as the Trump administration is saying, that we're about to see the restoration of the golden age of America, to use their own language? Is that how it looks to you?
Speaking as an American, I hope that's correct. You know, I love my country, but I'm also British and I love Great Britain. And so we will see. But it is a very big change. And change is frightening to many people. And I think as we rebalance, things will get better.
Okay, well, it could bring in $600 billion US dollars a year, these additional tariffs. I mean, that's not an inconsiderable sum of money, is it?
One does not sneeze at billions of dollars.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, Mary Jo Jacoby.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us today.
My pleasure.
Now, changing gears entirely, James May, who is renowned for his roles in Top Gear and The Grand Tour, is making headlines once again. Well known for his dry wit and passion for all things automotive, May has recently announced a live stage tour, which is set to begin later on this year. There are also rumours he's going to be reuniting with former co-hosts Richard Hammond and Jeremy Clarkson for a special episode of The Grand Tour entitled The Not Very Grand Tour. Well, what's true and what's not? Well, we can hear it from May himself, who joins us now from London. James May, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us.
Pleasure.
Lots of rumours about a reunion between you, Jeremy Clarkson, and Richard Hammond. What's true and what isn't?
Well, I'm afraid it's not a reunion. The Not Very Grand Tour is essentially a best-of compilation. Hosted from the studio by me and Richard Hammond. Jeremy Clarkson wasn't available for some reason, but we're all in the clips. It's all things you've seen before, but chopped up in a different way.
You say for some reason. Does that suggest you're not in regular contact with Jeremy Clarkson?
No, we recorded it a while back. To be honest, I can't remember why he couldn't be there. He was probably busy.
Okay, you don't like the idea of comebacks, do you?
Yeah.
You've said about the idea of comebacks in the past. We're not Led Zeppelin, you said. What's wrong with a comeback?
Well, there's nothing wrong with a comeback, and I'm a big fan of Led Zeppelin, but there comes a point where you have to draw a line under it and, you know, as we used to say, land it safely rather than crash it. We've exhausted our take on the subject. It's probably time for a more modern one. And we're already pretty old. So if we did a comeback in 20 years' time, it would be in bath chairs, you know, and I think it would be rather unseemly. So I really don't see it happening.
Yeah, you've said to other media outlets you're getting on a bit. You say, oh, you're not that old, you're only 62. But do you think the next generation is as interested in fast cars as your generation? I mean, what could the next generation bring to the table, do you think?
In all honesty, no, I don't think they are, on the whole. They have many more distractions and plenty that we didn't have. I think the car has never been at a more interesting time in its evolution, apart from the time when it was invented, I suppose. So there should be lots to say about it, about the way it's being used, the way it's being made, the connectivity of them. But I'm not quite sure how you do it. I mean, I try. I've written a few things about the future of cars and electric cars and so on, but it really takes, I think it will take some people in their 20s or early 30s with a very modern mindset and who can address sort of what you're alluding to. What the interest of today's young is in cars. It's going to be a different angle from the one we had, but I'm sure it must be there somewhere. I can't believe that car TV has come to an end.
Yeah, I mean, you, however, are and have been for a while something of a proponent of, alternative sources of fuel for cars, moving away from combustion engines. I mean, isn't that something that's quite close to your heart and therefore something you could produce and present quite convincingly?
Yes, well, I hope so. The trouble is, I mean, the internal combustion engine for my generation was in a sense, what made cars exciting, because it gave the car a mechanical character. It's a very flawed piece of technology, the internal combustion engine, so it has to be managed carefully. It needs gearboxes, it has to idle, all these things. But we found that exciting, or at least we made it exciting because that's all we had. The problem with electric cars is they have an absolutely uniform mechanical character because they are electric motors. They're smooth and they're quiet and they're very, very easy to use. So you have to get excited about cars, you maybe need to get more excited about styling, the interior comfort, features. I mean, these are things we talked about before, but our sort of appreciation of the car was dominated by engines. But the world can move on. There aren't people now, lamenting the demise of the steam engine, as far as I know.
Not that I'm aware of. But once cars start driving themselves, I mean, you really are out of a job, aren't you, then, when it comes to presenting a car driving show?
Yes. Well, I'm out of a job anyway, to be honest, because it's over. But funnily enough, I was in a self-driving car in California last week, one of the Waymos. And it was actually extremely impressive, if a bit unnerving. But I still think we're quite a long way away from driverless cars being on general sale or leased to the public. I think that's a long way off. It's still very much in the experimental stage. And it's a very complicated problem because you're talking about extremely advanced robotics. And robotics are always disappointing. I'm supposed to have a robot butler by now, but the most I can hope for really is a robotic vacuum cleaner that'll get stuck under the sofa. So I remain a bit cynical. It's fascinating technology, but I don't think it's just around the corner, not for most of us.
Yeah, electric vehicles very much in the headlines all the time, really, for lots of different reasons. There have been some attacks on Tesla cars, Tesla showrooms around the world. I mean, what do you make of all that? I mean, it looks like the brand's been quite politicised, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. I have a Tesla. I'm on my second Tesla, in fact, and I can't remember really a time when a car mark was seen as a political weapon or a political enemy. I mean, when I was a child, there were people who wouldn't buy German cars or Japanese cars because of World War II, but they were very old people even then. But it hasn't really happened in my time as a car journalist. And I find it a bit odd, to be honest, because yes, I accept that people have objections to Elon Musk's involvement in American politics, but why is that being taken out on a private individual's car in the UK or anywhere else in the world, for that matter? It strikes me as just pure vandalism or terrorism light. I have to say, nobody's dragged me out of mine yet and taken me to the gallows or anything like that, and nobody's set fire to it or written Nazi on it.
Are you happy with? Are you otherwise quite happy with your Tesla?
Yes, I mean it's not perfect. I really bought it because I feel that if you're a car enthusiast and a car commentator, you have to take an interest in these things. You have to be part of the experiment, and I'm in a fortunate position because I can afford to be. On the whole, I like it, yes, and I like electric cars, but I didn't buy a Tesla because I admired Elon Musk so much. I really admired the work of his engineers, and I bought it as a car, not as a statement.
What about Chinese electric vehicles? They're obviously a bit of a thorn in the side of American and European car manufacturers. I don't know if you've driven any. What do you think of them?
Yes, I've driven a couple of small ones by BYD and so on, and they were really quite good. The Chinese car industry is developing apace, rather like the Japanese one did in the 70s and early 80s. It's coming. I don't think there's anything we can do about it unless you want to tariff them out of existence. But that rarely works well for the motor industry, and it doesn't generally give people better cars.
Okay, just pivoting back to Elon Musk and Tesla for a moment, then we'll move on. Do you think there's perhaps a bit of scope for some collaboration in the future, some sort of a tie-up, perhaps have Elon Musk as a co-presenter on future generations of Top Gear? What do you think?
Well, I think he would be quite biased, to be honest. So I think you would struggle to sell that. I mean, especially if it was on Top Gear on the BBC, I think that would be regarded as against the charter. So no, I suspect he's quite busy anyway. I think the commentators on cars in the future have to be people ideally in their 20s. Who are looking at the world through the eyes of a new generation, and who are its inheritors, and they must be out there somewhere. There are millions and millions and millions of people in the world, and there are still quite a few people who are interested in cars and the whole transport picture. Somewhere amongst those, you need 3 or 4 that can be put together to make a TV show. I don't believe it's that difficult.
You've tried your hand at other things as well as presenting TV shows. You've got a country pub, the Royal Oak, in the west of England. That's a tough business, isn't it, running a pub?
Yes, I mean, I don't actually run it. We have a manager, and yes, it is extremely difficult to run a pub. I mean, we've just had to put up with, from yesterday, increases in the minimum wage, national insurance contributions, energy costs have gone up, everything's basically going up, insurance is going up. And the pub is actually very successful, it's very popular, but it still only just survives. And to be honest, that's partly because it's not tied to a brewery, so it doesn't have to pay anything back to the brewery. And it's owned by me and another man called Simon, who don't take anything out of it. So they don't have to satisfy the needs to pay a dividend to shareholders or anything like that. The pub is really, we'll have to regard it as a community service, I suppose. It pays the people who work for it very well and on time, which is as much as you can hope for, really. But I didn't buy the pub because I thought it was going to be a great money spinner. I didn't want it to shut because it's close to my country cottage. There wouldn't be a nearby pub if that one had shut. And owning a pub is a nice feeling, to be honest. A lot of us dreamt of it when we were younger. And a lot of people say, I'd love to own a pub. A lot of people think they can run a pub, but it's actually extremely difficult. And I wouldn't recommend going into it unless you are a professional in the hospitality industry. The hours are long and quite antisocial. There's every opportunity to get fat and drunk. The pay is not that brilliant, to be honest, and it's a struggle to keep those things open.
Jeremy Clarkson's got a pub as well. What's the difference in style, would you say, as you as a pub landlord and him?
Mine's much better. I think that's the main difference. I haven't actually been to Jeremy's pub. I've met a few people who have. It sounds like, from what I can gather, he's gone for a sort of mass throughput model. So he's got, hundreds of people queuing up to have his burger, whereas ours is a little bit more relaxed. It's a village pub where people come. The food is great. We've got a fabulous team of chefs. So mine would feel more like a regular English pub. It's not old-fashioned. It hasn't got horse brass on the walls or any of that twee stuff. There's no Morris dancing. I won't allow that. But it is just a pub.
Okay, I mean, you say your pub's much better, and you make lots of jokes about Jeremy Clarkson and Richard Hammond. Of course, there was really great chemistry between the three of you, the sort of 20-plus years you spent working together. And, you know, you're quoted as saying, I spent a third of my life with those two idiots. But when we hear you say things like that, we should take them with a good dose of affection, shouldn't we?
Yes, I mean, that is the British way, I'm afraid, when you work closely with people or you're, you know, in the army or something like that. There is a lot of ribbing. It's a sign of acceptance in Britain, especially amongst British men. You are the most horrible to the people who you rely on the most.
What about something for the future that you might do next? I mean, obviously you've ruled out a comeback on Top Gear, but you know we are moving more away from TV shows, perhaps more towards podcasts. Might a podcast be a good idea for a James May comeback?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got a few other things to do. I'm doing my Live Explorers show, and I'm doing some more stuff for Discovery and Channel 5, and I honestly thought I was going to retire this year, and this year has turned out to be the busiest I've had for quite a few. Quite a few people have asked me to do a podcast, but I'm not sure I have the strength left for it, to be honest, because the people who suggest it think it's easy, that you just stick a microphone on like this one that's in front of me now, and a recorder, and you just talk away and millions of people will subscribe to it and think it's brilliant. But I don't think it's that simple. I think podcast is a bit like radio and your sort of television. It consumes a massive amount of material and you've got to keep coming up with it. And I don't think I've got the strength.
Okay, I've got another idea. I've got another idea for you. Your childhood career dream was to be an astronaut, I'm told. If that's not true, do correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that was Jeremy. No, Jeremy who said he wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be a fighter pilot.
You didn't want to be an astronaut?
No, not particularly.
Okay.
I wanted to be a fighter pilot, which is sort of related.
My producer swears you wanted to be an astronaut, and I'm wondering whether perhaps how you'd have felt for those astronauts who were stuck on the International Space Station, and whether you thought you'd have managed being stuck up there in space for a few months with Jeremy Clarkson and Richard Hammond.
No, I think that would have been pretty disastrous, to be honest, because it's a confined space. I suspect weightlessness for an extended period makes you quite bad-tempered after a while. The food is not that exciting, is there? And there's no bar. So I don't think that would suit us in the slightest. We're very much a gravity-inspired trio.
All right, well, you're best known for sure for your car shows and your travel shows. So best car out there, what is it?
Oh, people ask me this all the time and I never know the answer. I mean, I'm secretly a bit of a fan of mid-engine Ferraris. And I have one, a 458 Speciale, which was probably the greatest car I ever drove, or I thought was the greatest car I drove when I was working on the car show, so I bought one. I'm also a massive fan of small, simple things like the Fiat Panda, old Minis, the Toyota Aygo, anything small and simple. I'm not really an SUV type person. I find them slightly absurd for most people's lives and uses. I don't really quite know where that fad has come from. But I mean, if I had to choose a car, as they used to say in England, to see me out, so it's just one car that does everything, for the rest of my life, to be honest, it would probably be a Golf, because I think the answer to most automotive questions is the VW Golf. And there you go, you see, that's quite interesting, because nobody is setting fire to VW dealerships or vandalizing Golfs by writing Nazi on them, but you're driving a car from a company that was quite literally founded by Hitler.
You make a very good point there. You've got, of course, some of the cars that you just mentioned in your collection. I'm talking about that Ferrari and the Fiat Panda, I'm told you still own, but maybe you don't, maybe you've sold it. I mean, is there a thread to your collection of cars? You've got quite a lot of them, and, you know, if you're going from a Ferrari to a Fiat Panda, I mean, that's quite a range, isn't it?
Yes, they're virtually indistinguishable, to be honest. I don't know. There isn't it's not really a car collection. I've just ended up with too many cars. There isn't a theme, apart from that I've avoided boredom, I think. Although sometimes the idea of a very, very boring car is quite appealing. Something like the old VW Jetta. It's a car so utterly anonymous that it's actually quite admirable, because it simply functions as a car and displays nothing else and ekes out of you no emotion whatsoever, either love or hatred or anything in between. There's nothing there when you drive a VW Jetta, and I quite admire that.
Yeah, you live in London. You obviously don't like driving in London, and obviously where you drive a car means, you know, what you're going to get out of that car. And as you say, you don't like driving in London. Have you ever driven in the Middle East? I think you have. Tell us about that.
I have. I've driven in. I've definitely driven in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and a little bit. Well, we have driven through bits of Jordan, bits of Iraq. I have been to Egypt quite a bit, but I haven't driven there. I think that's about it, actually, for my Middle East driving experience.
What do you make of the driving style in the Middle East?
Well, as far as I remember, it was pretty good. I mean, the country with the most terrifying driving, it used to be Spain years ago, but they've become very sensible now. Some South American countries I've been in have had some pretty random driving, but I seem to remember that the driving in the Middle East seemed quite restrained on the whole. Also, I believe the police are quite tough on bad driving, aren't they?
They certainly are. Yeah, you don't want to have too many traffic infractions here. Moving on from
quite big.
Moving on from cars to travel shows. I mean, is there a country that stands out for you, or a region that stands out for you as being, you know, right up there, top of the list?
Well, I have always been a massive fan of Japan, which is why I wanted to make that original one. I just find aesthetically, Japan is fascinating, because, you know, all the details, everything about it is just amazing to look at, and it's very meticulously organized. So that stands out. I mean, I'm not making any more travel shows. Amazon don't want those anymore, and to be honest, they're quite grueling to make. But I would have loved to have done the Middle East. We had one planned for the US, and we had one planned for South America, just loosely sketched out. And I find most places you go are pretty fascinating once you start talking to the people there, because that's actually what makes places. Architecture and food and so on is all very well, but it's actually mixing with people that makes the experience of traveling rewarding. And people are interesting everywhere.
They are. And just looking at what, you know, we're going to see from you next and where we might see you next. You're doing this stand-up live show. You go on tour later this year. Just tell us a bit about what that show is all about.
It's called Exploration from the Ice Age to the Space Age, which turns out to be an enormous subject to cover in one evening. But it's essentially a theatre stage show presented by me with audio-visual things and you know, a few special effects and so on. We're actually still working on it. I've been working on the script earlier today. So it goes around Australia, New Zealand, and then Singapore, and then later in the year it's going to come to Britain for a stint. And if it works and people like it, we may then continue it into other bits of the world. But basically, if you come, I hope people do, it sort of addresses the philosophy of exploration and the mindset and why humanity has done it. And we've always done it, and we all do it individually at a very small level. Some people take it to extremes, and they, you know, completely change the face of the world by colonization, discovery, trade, all these things. So it's not the whole story, because, as I said, it's enormous. But we've sort of plucked out a few good uns, a few bangers, as da kids would say, and those will all go into the performance. But as I say, we're still very much working on the script, so I can't tell you exactly what's in it yet.
Okay, we wouldn't want to spoil it. Just before we wrap up, I've been told by one of my producers to ask you your thoughts on the new Dacia Sandero. What do you have to say about that, Mr. May?
The old one, the first and second ones, I was always a big fan of because it was one of those, I don't think it is anymore, but it was the cheapest new car in Britain, which when I was a lad was always something sort of Soviet, like a Lada or a Moscovich. And to be honest, they were a bit ropey. But the Sandero was really an old Renault Clio with a different body on. And Dacia is actually part of Renault. And it was a pretty good car. It was quite basic, but it was a good car at a very low price. Now it started to, as with all these things, it started to grow a bit. And all cars are growing too much. They're becoming too bloated and too wide and so on. But it's still pretty appealing. And Dacia now make the Spring, which I drove a few weeks ago, which is not only at the moment the cheapest new car available in Britain, it's also electric. And, you know, for a long time, people have been saying electric cars are all very well, but they're too expensive. But now the cheapest new car you can buy is an electric one. So I suppose now we'll find out if people actually want them.
Sure. And just to wrap up, we're out of time. But I mean, do you think basically we are at the end of the road for cars and car ownership as we've known them throughout our lives, James?
In some ways, yes. I think we've arrived at a time when we have to reassess the car and how we use it. Now, I say this as someone who loves cars because I do, but I feel we should use them with discretion and carefully so that they are not ultimately taken away from us, not by the man or government or anything like that, but by the weight of public opinion. I don't think cars are very effective in towns and cities. I think they're actually a great way of getting between them. But around town, they're clutter. And I don't drive in London if I can possibly avoid it. The only time I take the car into London is if I've got to collect something really big, like a vase or a dining chair or something. The rest of the time I use public transport and bicycles because to be honest, it's quicker.
Yeah, totally agree with you. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. If you're ever in the Middle East, I do hope we'll be able to persuade you to come and talk to us in our studios. James May, British TV host, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thanks for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome, of course, to the Saudi House. Today, we're going to be talking about climate change, Saudi Arabia in particular, their contributions to addressing global environmental challenges. His Excellency Adel Al-Jubeir is here with me. Your Excellency, it's wonderful to see you as always.
It was a pleasure.
I want to kick off, though, by asking you about what we've seen in just the last 48 hours. U.S. President Donald Trump signing a raft of executive agreements and pledging to withdraw from the Paris Accords. In your mind, does that damage the world's ability to fight climate change?
I don't believe so. I think there are different ways of achieving the objective that we all want, and countries can pursue whatever path they believe is best for them. I think the important thing is the bottom line. The Trump administration in the first term actually did a lot to reduce carbon in the United States. So this is a very positive development. I think the important thing is that we look at these discussions as cooperative discussions, not as negotiations, because we're all trying to find the most optimum path forward to dealing with the challenges in a way that's unemotional, that's logical, that's scientific, so that we can overcome this challenge that we have. We're all in this together. There are no winners or losers. We all win or we all lose. That's the attitude that we in Saudi Arabia bring to this discussion.
Just 2 years ago here at the World Economic Forum, Al Gore described what was happening in climate as boiling oceans and rain bombs. A lot of people pushed back on that at the time privately, but they didn't necessarily feel comfortable doing so on a public stage. In your mind, how are these words changing when we describe climate?
We have a challenge that is before us with regard to climate change and with global warming. Nobody can dispute that, and the impact that it has on not only our climate, but on our politics, on conflicts, on not in dispute. I think what we need to adopt is a rational, scientifically based conversation, not grandstanding and not threatening, because it will be like the shepherds who cried wolf too many times and then nobody believed them. We know we have a problem. We know we have a challenge. So now that we know this, let's not talk about how it's going to kill all of us. Let's talk about how we extricate ourselves from this problem. We can do it by education. We can do it by more rational policies. We can do it by more efficient production of energy. We can do it by more efficient use of energy. We can do it by investing in alternative sources of energy. We can use it by combating desertification, by land restoration. We can use it by funding research to experiment with transformative technologies. And we are in Saudi Arabia doing all of this. We are setting aside 30% of our territory, land as well as sea, to be protected areas so that they're untouched. We are investing in greening. We are investing in transforming waste into energy. We are investing in solar, in hydro, we're looking seriously at nuclear power. We're investing in capturing carbon from the atmosphere. We're investing in a blue economy. We're investing in our seas and sustainable fishing. We are doing all of it because of two reasons. One, we live on this planet. We breathe the same air everybody does, and it's important for us that it's a healthy planet. And two, it's also very profitable. So there's an economic incentive to do this. And we have taken our experience and we expanded it into initiatives like the Middle East Green Initiative, which includes more than 22 countries, to teach countries how to incorporate the circular carbon economy approach so they can deal with environment and climate change issues the way we have been, so that we all benefit in our region. Because, as I said, we all win or we all lose. We are all in this together, and climate and pollution doesn't differentiate between one country and another. That's why the effort has to be regional and it has to be global.
Would you say then perhaps that the election of Donald Trump and his presidency is the great reset that the climate conversation needed?
I hope it would be, because I think everybody is concerned about environment, and everybody is concerned about climate, and it's important that all of us, individuals and nations and companies, do everything we can to deal with this challenge. But we will deal with this challenge. We have the technology, we have the financial resources. We need the political will to engage in a positive, cooperative conversation where we all come up with the best way forward, rather than engage in an emotional, argumentative, political scoring, hypocritical conflict that serves nobody.
Speaking of hypocrisy, over the last several days in the Financial Times, there's been reporting that billions of dollars have fled out of green ETFs and green investing. In your mind, are they jumping the gun there?
I don't know why they pulled out and what investment criteria they have. I do know that in Saudi Arabia, the investments that we have made in renewable energy, in solar, in turning waste into energy, in when we're looking at nuclear, when we're looking at efficiencies, ensuring that we don't have flaring of oil and gas, that we don't have leakages, that those have been extremely profitable. We have huge investments in electric vehicles. We're looking at producing electric batteries. We're looking at storage facilities. And for us, it's been these have been very profitable investments. So we are committed to continuing to invest in this. But in terms of the withdrawal of funds, I don't know what was the reason for them investing in those funds in the first place. I don't know what the returns are, so I'm not in a position to comment on it. But what I can say is it could be a function of people getting excited, wanting to do politically the right thing, and then realizing maybe the funds should have gone somewhere else.
When you think about what Saudi Arabia is doing in this fight against climate change and to make the planet, frankly, a better place, it was interesting. His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz just a few days ago during a Future Minerals Forum in Saudi Arabia talked about exporting enriched uranium, yellow cake. That's politically dicey, if you will, as you know. In your mind, how do you explain those kinds of exports to the world?
Very simple. We are a large energy producer in the world. We want to be an exporter of energy to the world, whether that energy is oil or gas, whether that energy is solar, whether that energy is electricity, whether that energy is hydro, whether that energy is nuclear. We want to have a nuclear program in Saudi Arabia to produce energy. We have between 1% and 4%, according to estimates, of the world's uranium deposits in country. It makes a lot of sense to exploit those resources economically by mining it. It makes even more sense that once you mine it, that you engage in the processing to turn the uranium into fuel that you can sell at a higher price. So that includes all of the steps in turning uranium from dirt into energy. And it involves taking advantage of the associated industries that come with this and taking advantage of the profits that come with this. We do not want to be a country where mining companies come in, dig up the soil, remove it, do all the processing and all the refining and all the producing of energy outside. We end up with a hole and we take less than 10% of the value chain. We want to benefit jobs, associated industry, and profits. And we believe that we can do it, as does the International Atomic Energy Agency, in a way that has nothing to do with producing nuclear weapons. Our objective is energy and profit.
Tell me this, speaking of weapons, in the years past, we've often talked about how Saudi Arabia in the 70s and Russia just a few years ago was using energy as a weapon. In your mind, how vulnerable are we today in our energy systems? And I'm talking about whether it be the enormous amount of energy that AI, as we know, is going to require, whether it be just oil markets generally. How vulnerable are we today in our energy markets?
I don't believe, I wouldn't describe it as vulnerable. I would describe it as we are looking at an increase in demand that needs to be filled somehow. Because if it's not filled, then you're going to see a huge spike in prices. And AI and data centers require a lot of energy, and that energy has to come from somewhere. We in Saudi Arabia want to be a hub for these centers. We have the land. We want to be able to, we can produce that energy using renewable energy, solar energy, other energy, and we can do it efficiently. And we believe that given our geographic location, we can have the connectivity to be able to send it abroad. So this is one of the priorities for us. So I think that this is how I would look at it. In terms of oil weaponizing energy, we have maintained for many decades that oil is not a weapon. It's not
anymore.
It's not a weapon. You can't shoot it. You can't fire it. You don't take it to the battlefield. It's a commodity, and it's a precious commodity. It relies on Supply and demand sets the price. We want to be a responsible producer. We have been a swing producer where we try to keep the markets in balance as much as we can to reduce the massive fluctuations in the price of oil, so that it makes it easier for people to invest, to borrow money, and to return their investment, and also to plan long term. That provides stability for the global financial markets, which serves us because we are big investors and we are energy producers, and we want stability in the financial markets.
Yeah. Donald Trump is widely expected to visit Saudi Arabia in the near future. What kind of conversation do you want to have with him regarding energy and climate?
President Trump is most welcome in Saudi Arabia anytime he wants to come. And I think the conversations between Saudi Arabia and the United States, we have been allies, we have been partners for 80 years. We have huge interests, whether it's bilaterally in terms of trade, investment, in terms of cultural exchanges, in terms of students, in terms of whether it's regionally. We work very closely together on bringing peace and stability in a region, maintaining security in a region, whether it's globally, the same issue. We have very important relationships on technology, on energy, on investments. We are large investors in the U.S. economy. American companies are large investors in the Saudi economy. So it is a huge relationship, and it has many, many dimensions to it. And every time our two countries have worked closely together, they have been able to achieve great things, whether in terms of stability and security and peace regionally and globally, and in terms of prosperity for both countries when it comes to trade and investment issues.
There's a lot of speculation about what the U.S.-China relationship will be in the future. Saudi Arabia, of course, has a strong relationship both with the United States and, of course, with Beijing. How worried are you about the possibility that a trade war between the United States and China could derail your agenda as a country?
We have very strong relationships with both countries. Our relationship with the U.S. is a strategic relationship. China is our largest trading partner. We believe that stability in the global financial system and the global market serves everyone, and we hope that the two countries will be able to negotiate their differences, because a trade war does not serve the interests of either. And I believe that we have seen in the past that the two countries have been able to negotiate or resolve their issues and reach understandings through by discussing it rather than by turning it into trade wars.
Talk to me a little bit about the region when it comes to climate. Obviously, we see the UAE made a great deal of strides, obviously hosting COP28. In your mind, as Saudi looks forward to its own hosting of a COP, what are some of the things you're hoping that the region is able to achieve?
Our region, the Gulf region in particular, has done, I think, an outstanding job in terms of dealing with climate, the challenges of climate, as well as land degradation, as well as biodiversity. So the Rio Trio, the three COPs, we have invested tremendous resources in it, beginning with education and all the way to implementation. In Saudi Arabia, we have more than 70 initiatives domestically that deal with all of these issues. We have initiatives globally. I mentioned the Middle East Green Initiative. We established the Global Water Organization. That was an initiative by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince to bring clean water and how we use water more efficiently to as many people as possible. We are part of the Methane Pledge. We are involved with cleaning oceans, and we're involved with reversing pollution of plastics. We are involved in a lot of initiatives, and we have provided investments to many countries around the world to help them with resilience, to help them with beefing up infrastructure, to help them with desalination, to help them with on and on and on. We are doing a lot of things. We hosted COP16, the Earth COP, was a land degradation and drought COP, and our objective was to raise the awareness level and highlight the link, the nexus between land degradation and security. If you have land degradation, people don't have food, they move to places where they can plant food. Chances are people live there, you have conflict, you have bloodshed, you have violence, you have extremism, you have terrorism, you have migration. The migrants end up in a country where there could be a reaction that leads to extremist politics. So when you look at extremist politics in Europe, you can trace its linkage to a particular place in Africa or in the Middle East. And you can trace the origins of that conflict to drought. You look at the countries in the Sahel, 90% of the Chad River evaporated since the 1960s. It created dislocations for millions of people who moved, created conflict, and then we're paying the price. Darfur, Sudan has been engaged in a conflict for almost 40 years. And it started with drought, and it turned into a conflict, ethnic conflict, civil war, people paying the price. And our objective is to highlight this to people, invest early in land restoration, and avoid the consequences that will cost us 50 times more to deal with than if we had dealt with it at the outset. And the irony of all of this is investing $1 in land restoration generates between $7 and $30 in profit. This is better than investing in high tech. Why don't people do it? And this is what we're trying to show people. And this is not an issue, land degradation, that concerns North Africa and the Middle East. Germany has a problem with the waters of the Rhine. Southern Europe has problems with drought. This is an issue that impacts everyone. Sweden gets dust from the Sahara Desert, as does Costa Rica. We get dust from as far away as the Chinese desert. And we have a lot around us. So this is a global issue, and it's straightforward to deal with. We just need to focus on it and get it done, and this is what we're trying to do in Saudi Arabia.
You may remember President Biden's Secretary of Defense, as well as the current Secretary of Defense in the United Kingdom, have cited climate change as their number one worry for the planet, their number one concern. Now that we have Trump in the White House, is climate your number one concern for the planet?
Ours?
Yeah.
I believe for everybody, the issue of climate change, the issue of whether it's too little water or too much water, the issue of rising temperatures, everybody acknowledges this.
But is it the number one concern facing us?
I think it certainly is. If it's not the number one, it is right up there, because it impacts everything. It impacts, for example, desertification, impacts the reflection of the sun, impacts weather patterns over the Atlantic, impacts the frequency and intensity of hurricanes in the Caribbean, impacts weather climates around the world. Dust can do the same thing. And also the climate issues can impact what happens in the oceans, and the oceans are our biggest reservoir for carbon. And that impacts, again, the rain patterns. And so it's a cycle that impacts everything we do, and it's linked to economic development, it's linked to wars and conflict, it's linked to prosperity. 800 million people on the planet are undernourished. The amount of land we can grow food on shrinks. Populations are rising. So we're heading towards conflict. We have to fix these issues. And I don't believe that anyone disagrees with this. I believe the differences have to do with what's the right way to move forward in tackling these issues. And I think that grandstanding and emotions and hypocrisy and threats and shaming and naming and finger pointing doesn't get us anywhere. Rolling up our sleeves and planting trees redesigning our cities, investing in technology, investing in alternative sources of energy, pointing out the benefits and the profitability of that path is what will get people to move towards the right direction. And when we can deal with these issues, they will have a direct positive impact on security, which will then have an impact on stability and peace.
It's interesting, over the last several days leading up to his inauguration, Donald Trump talking about Greenland. I've spent a lot of time in Russia and Ukraine, as you know. And when we talk about climate and what's happening in the Arctic, the ice, surprise, surprise, is melting. That raises security concerns. Russia has the most military intelligence hardware in the Arctic, as well as oil and gas infrastructure, as you know. In your mind, are we living in dangerous times as a result of climate change?
I think we are always living in challenging times. The history, unfortunately, of mankind has been one of wars, not peace and stability. I believe that the conflicts may shift from one region or another depending on the century we live in, but war has been a constant in our history, unfortunately. I think we are moving towards a global society, a global village. I don't want to call it village, it's too big for a village, where we now recognize that something happening on one end of the world has a direct impact on something on the other end of the world, which we never had before. How long did it take to get mail from Europe to the United States 150 years ago? Now it takes a nanosecond to get pictures and voicemail and from the Amazon forest to Siberia because of technology. How long? So now we deal with the issues of that go beyond our borders, that impact all of us positively or negatively. COVID doesn't differentiate between male, female, between Muslim, Jew, Christian, between Asian, African, European. It doesn't differentiate. We are all its target. And unless we all work together to contain it, we can't. And we did work together in spite of our differences. Maybe not ideal, but in a very effective way to contain it and push back against it. So we are, in one hand, yes, business as usual, challenging world, you called it dangerous world, but also business as unusual, which is a recognition that we need to deal with each other to handle global issues like pandemics, like climate, like transportation, and that those issues can only be handled if we work together. So on one hand, you're seeing the world coming together much more closely than before, while at the same time we're the same in the sense of our tensions. And my hope, and I believe this is where we're heading, because I'm an optimist, is that as we learn and more, as we learn of the benefits that we get by working together, the side of the side of the equation that it spells cooperation grows, and the side of the equation that spells conflict gets diminished. Because where does conflict get us? Nowhere. We can have conflict for 30 years and we'll be worse off than we were when we started. Whereas if we have cooperation, technology, artificial intelligence, trade, in 30 years we can be many, many times wealthier than where we are today. Which vision do you want? Going forwards and upwards, or going backwards and downwards?
Are we, as he says, safer, the world, with Donald Trump in the White House?
I don't see why people talk about this. I think, yes, the world is safer. The world is safer with anyone in the White House. The world is safer because the world is beginning to recognize that we need to work together. We need to deal with challenges that are beyond us as nations or as ethnic groups or as religious groups, and that we have to deal with problems or challenges or dangers as humanity, that we can't escape that. And I believe that we are beginning to do this, and we will continue to do more of this. And so I'm hopeful that our children and grandchildren will be living in a world that is more together and more calm and more prosperous and more healthy than the one we live in.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Risk